We want to welcome everybody. Special edition of Iowa Live / Iowa Postgame here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Corey Browder from the Hawkeye of the Storm, and I'm joined by none other than Coach Don Patterson. And we're going to be talking about a multitude of subjects this evening, Don. But as always, I want to check in on you and see how your weekend went. I understand you did some TV work over the weekend for the UNI Panther game. How did the trip up to Cedar Falls go?
It was a wonderful game if you're a UNI fan. 41-3. I think it was important for UNI to not just win, but look good doing it, and they got that accomplished. I honestly don't know. The selection show would be sometime this afternoon, and according to the assistant commissioner that was at the game, he thought they at least had a 50-50 chance of getting into the playoffs. So we'll hope they made it because they had several key players that missed the game that would be available next weekend. And this league is so tough. It's not hard to imagine that they'll win next weekend, even if they do have a 6-5 record.
It's amazing what Farley has done there, just year in and year out, Don. It's never failed to impress me, and it's impressive that a guy like Farley has stuck around for so many years, because I'm sure he's had opportunities. I don't know how well you know Mark Farley, but what are your thoughts on just his devotion to UNI football?
I know him very well. We've coached against each other through the years. You're exactly right. That's his school. You know, he feels a special to Northern Iowa, and he's certainly done a really nice job there in representing them. And they had an excellent game plan. And just realize this, Corey, nobody had shut down Western Illinois like that. Western's problems were stopping other people, but they put up points against everyone, and yet against Northern Iowa, they scored a grand total of 3. So a really good game plan, similar to what we use so many times. A lot of zone coverage, eyes on the quarterback, good position on the ball, just react up and tackle people, have a good pass rush with only 4 rushers, or even 3 in some cases, and be sacked because of coverage. And it worked. I think they sacked Western, I believe, 13 times in the game, and I felt sorry for the Western quarterback because he didn't have any good options in terms of finding receivers because there were so many people in coverage.
Well, Don, there's a plethora of subjects that I want to get to as it relates to Iowa football, and I know we'll have calls and comments about some of these same subjects. So before we get to our calls and comments this evening, and of course, our listeners are what make this show possible, of course, along with your expertise, Don. So I do want to get to those in a moment. But a lot to unpack, I feel like, at this point in the season. We're one game away from completing the 12-game grind. I have a number of takeaways from yesterday, and we can talk about Iowa, Illinois specifically. Before we get to the details of what happened yesterday, Tyrone Tracy didn't have a single target yesterday, Don, at least according to the stat sheet that I saw. I did take a look at the participation log because there was a question yesterday during our live show, did Tyrone Tracy see the field? The answer to that question is yes, at least according to the participation log. Did you see Tyrone on the field yesterday? And is this a result, do you think, of his tweet from last Sunday?
You're talking about being on the field on offense? To my knowledge, he was not out there for a single snap. Now, I didn't look for him, but I certainly didn't notice him either.
So was he on the field in special teams then?
I think he might have been on Charlie's kickoff return. I believe I saw him celebrating down in the end zone with Charlie. And I don't think he came off the bench to do that. So I suspect he was out there for that kickoff return. And maybe out there for any number of specialty team plays.
I guess a couple takeaways from that, if that's true, because again, according to the official box score from the University of Iowa, he did participate in this game, but no targets. And again, you didn't see him. I don't recall seeing him, at least on offense. I did see him celebrating with Charlie, although I didn't know at the time if if that was in the end zone or if it was on the sideline. It was kind of hard to tell. But I mean, has this been, obviously it's positive that he's celebrating with Charlie, despite obviously losing some grasp of positioning on this depth chart. I mean, there's no question he's sort of fallen off the map all of a sudden, and we've that's been well documented. But what are your thoughts, your overreaching thoughts on Tyrone Tracy right now, Don, and just his standing with this team?
Well, you heard me say a week ago, Corey, if you're not a team player, then maybe it's best that you're not on the team. Now, that may sound kind of harsh, but I think I've told you before, the first thing I always did with my players is explain to them that it's not about you. It's all about the team. And if you want more playing time, then you simply produce when you have your chance. And if you don't have a chance in the game, then you better produce in practice. Because our livelihood depends on playing the best players. That's what we're going to do. I've never known a coach that intentionally played something other than his best players. And I've always, sometimes as a head coach, I'd have players come to me and say, Coach, I think you have a real appreciation for how well I can play, but I don't think my position coach does. And invariably, I was able to say, you may have that perception, but you're wrong. And you can have one of two mindsets. You can have the mindset that you're a victim, or you can have the mindset of I'll show him. And that's the right mindset to have. He simply hadn't gained a full appreciation for how well you can play. And the only way to change that is for you to play better. And if you play better, then you'll see more playing time. Marv Cook told my team one time at Western Illinois, he said, I want to tell you about a time when I was a young player at Iowa. I thought I should be playing more at tight end, even though there were older and more experienced players ahead of me. And I got really frustrated with lack of playing time. And finally it occurred to me, every time I get frustrated, why don't I do something to make myself a better player? Why don't I go to the weight room? Why don't I study film? Why don't I go out and run? Why don't I work on explosive movement? And he said, a funny thing happened. The harder I worked with all that preparation, the more that old coach liked me. And oh, by the way, that coach is your head coach. And I thought I was a better player than the other guys, but looking back, I wasn't. And the harder I prepared, the more I played. And in the end, it all worked out just great because I was a consensus All-American. I did have a chance to play in a couple of Pro Bowls. And it all started with my coaches making sure that I understood that you got to earn your way. Nothing's going to be given to you. But I can promise you the best players will play the most. That's what I've always told them. And I said, if you're the second best player, you'll play not as many reps as the starter, but you'll play as much as you deserve to play. And maybe under really unusual conditions, if it's a really hot day in September, maybe you'll play more than you deserve to play simply because our starters is running low on gas. So if a player doesn't want to be a team player, then he needs to choose a different sport, maybe golf or tennis, so he can excel on his own. I've lost you, Corey.
Can you hear me now, Don? I apologize for that.
Yep, you're back.
I do want to apologize. I think we had a caller and I accidentally cut him off. So I apologize to our caller there. I was trying to put you on hold and I think I snoozed you as the terminology goes here in this software. So please call back. If you have any issues calling back, let us know in the chat, but I apologize for that. There was a comment here regarding the play of Tyrone Tracy. Todd, according to Todd, he says he went in for number 10 on one play on offense, which I guess could be the case. I didn't notice that specifically. But going back to that tweet a week ago, Don, because we never really had a chance to talk about that because we were on the day before that occurred. The era of social media is so much different. Did you ever have anything like this happen when you were a head coach or having to deal with tweets and all this garbly-goop that we have in this modern age of social media?
Of course, I was last a head coach 12 years ago. As you know, I was an assistant coach at Buffalo and at UConn for 5 years total. And I guess that social media was coming into play then. It really wasn't an issue, though. We just always address it long before it ever becomes a problem. And you've heard me say also, Corey, after a big win, any old experienced coach is looking around the locker room to see who's not excited about that big win, because that's a red flag. If you're not excited, and there might be an explanation. Maybe the poor guy just had a terrible game. Maybe he had 3 drops as a receiver, and he was frustrated that he would play so poorly when it mattered so much. But in general, of course, even then, you like to think that he can put that aside for a while and celebrate with his teammates.
Absolutely. And it was good. Again, I want to give Tyrone Tracy credit where credit is due. He was celebrating, and that was good to see on television. Of course, my mind goes to when you see his role diminishing, when you see those types of tweets coming from him. And then, of course, we had the incident here a couple of weeks ago with his brother sending out some tweets regarding his role in the coaches. To me, that just screams transfer. And maybe I'm selling him short. I hope that's not the case. But let's be honest, from a football perspective, Don, you talked about the best player winning out. Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce, especially Bruce yesterday, have proven to be better receivers, at least right now. They're playing better, and they've earned the time, which gets me to my next topic, Don, and that is drops. I watched that game yesterday, and of course, we know the statistics. Alex Padilla goes 6 of 17 for 83 yards and a pick. But if you hadn't showed me those stats late in the fourth quarter, there's no way on earth I would have predicted that was Alex Padilla's line, because I felt like he played okay. Now, if this was Spencer Petras, who threw 6 of 17 for 83 yards and a pick, everybody would be calling for him to be benched. But here are the facts, Don. The number of drops have increased with Alex at the helm. And I've got a few stats for you, and this is courtesy of Pro Football Focus. So according to Pro Football Focus, with Padilla at quarterback, Iowa has a 22% drop rate, which leads the FBS in quarterbacks with over 50 attempts. Specifically, it was 40% against Illinois yesterday. Now, Petras, just to compare, when he was the quarterback, his receivers had a 6.6% drop completion for the season. So obviously, those numbers are stark, especially yesterday. And I'm sure there's different factors that can lead to that, Don. And we had a caller in yesterday who brought up the fact that Spencer does throw a tighter spiral. He seems to throw a cleaner ball. What are your thoughts on these numbers and just what you're seeing from Iowa receivers? It seems like the drops are coming from a lot of different places right now.
I wouldn't put too much stock in what the drop rate is for just a minimal number of passes. If he's over 50 attempts, he's barely over 50 attempts. To be honest with you, I don't know that he's got 50 attempts yet. I suppose he does because they claim he does. But the thing that comes to mind for me, and I had, according to my breakdown, and it takes me about 5 hours to watch 3.5 hours worth of a TV game because I'm stopping and making notes and going back and looking at certain plays. But I had us down for 5 drops. Reganey with 2, Laporta with 1, Lachey with 1, and Johnson with 1. But there were also 3 throwaways in there. So that's 8. And we were 6 for 17. So that only leaves three passes that were inaccurately thrown that for sure we could blame the quarterback for. One comment that comes to mind for me, most of those drops were on slant routes. And you've heard me say before, Corey, there are times when location is more important than velocity. Slant routes are a prime example. The ball needs to be, ideally, you take a little bit off your throw because nothing's more difficult than catching a slant that's thrown 100 miles an hour. So if you can take a little pace off the ball, that's a good thing. And the bottom line, and that's the beauty of a guy like Aaron Rodgers. Somehow he's able to take some velocity off throws and still have them on target. And that only comes with years and years of practice, of course. If you're good enough to do that, then you're going to be making $10 million a year or whatever he gets paid. So slant routes are difficult to catch. In general, we had contact shortly after the ball arrived. Sometimes the contact might have caused the ball to come out. Sometimes the location was the problem, especially when you factor in a little extra velocity. There were several high throws on the part of both quarterbacks, not high, but just a little bit high. And you've always heard me say on slants, keep the ball below their chin. I'd much rather a player have to go down and get it and catch it low than have a slant thrown high because the tip pass is an interception, of course. And you saw a prime example of that with Campbell late in the game in our favor. So part of our problem was the routes we were running. Slant routes are difficult, especially if you got pretty tight coverage. I do remember Laporta's drop. The ball was thrown a little bit late. It was just a 4-yard route, but the ball was thrown a little bit late to Laporta. The contact arrived a split second after the ball did, and the ball was jostled out. So the thing I'm looking for is location on those kind of throws, and also anticipation of that break point so that the ball comes out on time and not late. And the slant routes were generally on time. I thought the routes were kind of mediocre, to be honest with you. We didn't have a lot of separation. I thought we tried too hard to throw slant routes, and we didn't throw them very effectively at all. But there are other routes to run versus man coverage, and you've heard me talk about that. I didn't see many rub routes at all. Rub routes, and it's easy to do. Loop ins, loop outs, change of direction routes. We got burned on one of those early in the game, you might recall, even though I believe it was against zone coverage, I think. But at any rate, redirected routes where you change direction significantly, cracks and swings, so that a player on the line of scrimmage is actually blocking somebody that's manned up on a different receiver, and yet the guy manned up on him has to run with him because he thinks he's going to be catching a pass. So in that regard, you can have one player to account for two defenders. Stuff like that we didn't do. And obviously the coaches had seen on film that slants made a lot of sense. At the end of the day, they really weren't very effective for us. And thankfully, it didn't matter too much because our running game was so superior to theirs that more than made up for the shortage on offense from a passing standpoint.
And I think we can both agree that was a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect Iowa to outrush Illinois.
Yeah. I did go back and check. I was curious. Last weekend, as you know, Minnesota outrushed us by more than 100 yards, and yet we still won the game. And that's extremely rare when that happens. Last year in the Big Ten, if you had an edge of 100 or more yards in rushing, you won 90% of the time. So here we are with that 100-yard edge on Illinois, and it worked out like it was supposed to. We did win the game, in large part because, we did a good job of staying on the field. And I give a lot of credit to our defense. They did a great job of slowing down number 2. I didn't think anybody would hold him to 42 yards. So we did a good job of neutralizing their run schemes and obviously did a good job of rallying to the ball and didn't miss too many tackles either. So it was a good day, especially as it relates to rush offense and rush defense. We were especially good in both those, and I think that made all the difference.
And so maybe I am reading too much into these numbers. I will say also factoring in these numbers, the 22% drop rate for Padilla, and I get he's had a smaller sample size for sure, 40% against Illinois. To go along with that, if you factor in the adjusted completion rate, 71.4% adjusted completion rate versus Illinois. If you're again factoring in those drops on what Pro Football Focus considers an on-target pass, Petrus at 68.8%. Again, maybe I'm reading it into that a little bit too much, Don, but I think we both agree it felt like Padilla played better than those stats showed. But you're right, the running game controlled things. How concerned are you, though, about drops moving forward? Because we have seen Charlie Jones drop a ball or two. We've seen Laporta. Lachey, I believe, dropped one yesterday. Certainly Tracy's had his issues. Keegan Johnson, some issues with drops cropping up recently. Are you concerned with that? I know you talked about routes, but are you concerned with drops?
Sure, I'm concerned about drops. But part of the drop issue relates to the throw itself. The ball needs to be on target. Now, we always have the mindset, if you can touch it, you can catch it. That's the mindset that any receiver has. Right. That's worth its salt. But the reality is that some balls that are a little bit off target are significantly harder to catch. Prime example would be a slant route where you throw the ball not in front of the receiver, but throw it on his back shoulder. Good luck catching that, because you're running at top speed and all of a sudden the ball's behind you. And yet you have to adjust and try to control the ball. Difficult to do. A lot of times that's when the ball does skip off your hands and stays in the air sometimes for too long. I do think, the receivers, I always emphasize this. If you're catching at 95% and the other guy's catching at 90, the 90% guy needs to understand he's twice as good as I am because you're judged on the ones you drop, not the ones you catch. So if you're dropping 10% and your competitor for playing time is dropping 5, he's only going to drop half as many. He's twice as effective as you are. And when you explain it like that, receivers understand every catch does matter. And if you have a drop, the thing that you should always do, even in practice or even warm-ups, is analyze why you dropped it. Sometimes it's a question. Maybe you had your thumbs out instead of in. Maybe you had your thumbs in instead of out. But there's a proper way to field each and every pass, of course. And maybe you're not cushioning the ball. Maybe you're stabbing at the ball. There are a lot of reasons. Maybe you're not looking it in. You've seen that with any number of receivers. They tend to take off with the ball before the ball ever arrives. And, of course, if you look away just for a split second, then you certainly may not be able to control the ball.
Sorry about that. We asked the question, Don, or you asked the question a few minutes ago about how many passes Padilla has thrown. Just from these 3 games, he has thrown 69. So he is over that 50 mark. And I think he probably had a couple throws earlier in the season if we're going to factor those in as well. But that would be a concern of mine. And Keegan Johnson seemed pretty sure-handed a few games ago, and I don't know why. Again, I'm surprised too that he would be a guy struggling, given the fact that he's been catching passes from Padilla in practice for all this time, Don, as a 2.
Right. Again, not a really big sample, though. I don't know how many balls he's dropped versus catch, but not a huge sample. And it's not entirely unexpected because he is a freshman. He hadn't played in front of 70,000 very often yet. And if he's dropped one already, then he's a little anxious about catching the next one. That's just all part of being a human being. So what they should do, of course, and I'm sure they do it before they leave the practice field, they get over on the jugs machine, and those balls are rapid fire at them after practice, and they expect to catch every last one of them. And that's not exactly the same as a game, of course, but it's still a good exercise to be sure that you're cushioning the ball and looking the ball in, and for that matter, tucking it away after you catch. Stuff like that's important. It's all fundamental to being a good receiver.
Skylar Mummert, he says, I'm calling tonight. If you're going to do that, Skylar, call now, because I don't know if I did something with the call lines. We had issues with the caller line yesterday, Don. We had to go to plan B, and plan B was not as smooth. So if someone would please give us a call, even if it's just to test our line out now, because we had a call, I accidentally cut them off, and now I'm not seeing anything. So please give us a call, and if for some reason it's not working, let us know. Good to see James Hemmer back this evening. I know he gave us a call yesterday. David Baum, he says, hi guys, love the show. Are the Ferences just stubborn to have a more creative, upbeat offense, or do teams hire consultants? Don, how would you answer that?
Teams do not typically hire consultants. It doesn't mean that out of season they might not discuss their football philosophies with other people that are maybe even no longer in football, people they respect. Other people, of course, don't really want an outside opinion, and they're convinced that their way is the best way, and sometimes they're stubborn to a fault. You know, at some point it might even cost them a job.
Okay. James Hemmer talks about the social media policy, and certainly this past off season, you know, you look back in hindsight, of course, hindsight's 2020, and I don't think Kirk really had a choice, but had the social media policy stood as it was, we would have never heard a tweet like we had Sunday from Tyrone Tracy. But as we've talked about in the past, Kirk was between a rock and a hard place on that one. You know, that's the downside of social media. There are positives and there are negatives. Say hello to Greg Campbell. Appreciate you being on tonight. The man here, he says, if we want to eventually recruit a 4-star quarterback, we can't have stat lines like 6 of 17 for 83 yards. And we did hear that as a bit of a narrative yesterday, Don, that because Iowa plays so conservative, or, you know, it's a result of I guess, a number of factors why Iowa quarterbacks don't put up flashy numbers. It hurts you in recruiting. Why would a 4 or 5-star kid want to come to Iowa at quarterback? And if you asked me that question, Don, if I was a 4 or 5-star quarterback, now I'm an Iowa guy, but Iowa would not be at the top of my list. Is there substance to that claim?
Yeah, that's a valid question. I think that would hurt our chances with certain quarterbacks out there. No doubt about that.
Skylar, yes. The number is the number you have there. 860-499-3332. You don't have a 2 there at the end, Skylar. 860-499-3332, not 3333. Okay. Let's get that number correctly. Here, Yakov22 says, Coach, do you think the O-line is getting a better push on running plays than earlier this season? It seems like they've turned a bit of a corner, but what are your thoughts on the run game? I know you mentioned it briefly earlier.
Based on yesterday, the answer would be yes. I was pleased to see that we had better running lane opportunities. The averages, I got them in front of me here. Our backup average 5.6, 10 carries for 56 yards. Tyler had 27 for 132. As I mentioned, we outrushed them by more than 100 yards. And then looking at our run defense, we held Illinois to 64 yards, which is 116 yards below their average, significantly less than what they usually run for. And that's a real commitment to being able to slow down that run game. And I think you got to give our coaches credit for doing a good job on both sides of the ball as it relates to the run.
Absolutely. I see James commenting on Petrus throwing it out of bounds a lot. Tyree Tasco. Tyree, amen. I'm not getting the reference here, Don. Is this somebody that you know or somebody that you coached?
No, I don't
Tyree
believe I know.
Tasco.
Don't know Tyree.
Not sure on the reference there. Maybe I'm missing something. Dennis Barnes. Hello from Oak Harbor, Washington. Always good to hear from our Hawkeye fans across the country, even outside the country at times. And appreciate you being here. And certainly this is a special treat to have Don on a Sunday for a special edition of Iowa Live. And we will talk about Iowa and Nebraska here in a little bit. I do have a few notes from the game, Don, that I wanted to share with you that I kind of held back on yesterday. 3rd and 2, first quarter. I thought it was a really good play call. Brian Ferentz, 3rd and 2. They fake the fullback dive. They toss right. It's a beautiful play. It's what you've talked about, building up a bit of a habit or a tendency, and then, of course, breaking it. What did you think of? I know it's just one play call, but we've got to give Brian credit for what he does do well. That was a good decision, and it worked.
I made a note on that same play. Good to see belly pitch again. I think we ran it against it was either Colorado State or Kent State, I can't recall. This time it was only worth 7 yards, but who's going to quibble about a 7-yard gain on short yardage?
Right.
It was well executed. The only thing I'd say, I believe we were unbalanced when we ran it the first time. We ran it unbalanced again. In other words, the widest player in our formation was our tackle. And I think if we ran it with the same formation twice, I wouldn't try it a third time. I might run the play again, but not out of unbalanced, because a good defense will be alerted. It's unbalanced, look for belly pitch, especially if it's short yardage.
And then, Don, also, I thought it was interesting they deferred to the second half, which we've seen Iowa do a little bit more recently. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, you were not at the game, I know, but what were your thoughts on them deferring? Are they doing this more? I know maybe we've talked about this in the past, but are they factoring in win more? Because it seems like Iowa used to just always take possession if they could get it. But to me, you want to start with your best unit.
I think Kirk is more likely to defer if the wind he thinks is a fairly significant factor. And I don't think the wind was that strong yesterday. I'm assuming it was a little bit out of the south.
Well, the reason I asked, Don, is because we heard all week, and Kirk talked about it Tuesday, that it was going to be a difficult day to get kickoff returns. because Illinois had a tendency to get him out of the back of the end zone. And the first 3 were returnable. Charlie Jones returns the first 2. And honestly, I'll be completely honest. After those first 2 that maybe made to the 20, but we've not really gotten great kickoff returns as of late from Charlie. On that third one, of course, I can't see what's going on down the field, but that third one, I thought, fair catch the ball. And I say that, and then he takes it back 100 yards. So I just wondered if the wind was a factor there. And that if it was, then that's a smart decision by Kirk, deferring to the second half. It helped create that 100-yard return.
Well, I'm just glad that I'm sure Charlie had the mindset. And, of course, I don't doubt that before he leaves the bench, he's told in rare cases to fair catch it. In general, of course, we've tried to return them. Very few fair catches, as I recall. A time to fair catch. Well, obviously, if you're protecting a lead and you don't want to take a risk on a hard hit on a kickoff, then maybe you'll fair catch it so you can just safely start on the 25. But at that particular time in the game, we're down 10-0. We've done not much up to that point, and it's wonderful when one play can turn everything around. And let's face it, we're not great at overcoming 10-point deficits, and momentum was on their side, the score was on their side, and Charlie changed all that with one play. And Charlie would be, I'm sure, would say, not without a lot of good blocking. There were 2 guys in particular I wanted to decide on that play. Ivory Kelly Martin had a nice block on that play, and also number 13 did. And I
Henry Marquez. Yep.
What's his first name again?
Henry Marquez. Yeah. Yep.
John Marquez's son rather. John played for us from 82 to 86. He was a valuable teammate. He was a walk-on that I don't recall for sure that John ended up with a scholarship. I can't remember, but I do remember him as a valuable member to the team. And what a neat moment for the family to honor not one but 2 sons playing in Henry's case, the last home game he'll ever play in Kinnick. And in the case of his brother from Illinois, his next to last football game in college football too.
Okay, I've had a lot of comparisons. People have compared me to Fred Savage. Rob Lowe is another person. Will's Wolverine Report. He says, I'm not going to repeat what he says here, but he says, Burt Reynolds. I do have a little facial hair growing on here, Don. It's not a new style. I want to make that clear. I'm not a facial hair guy. I'm not saying that you don't look good with a mustache, but I am not a facial hair guy. The reason why I'm growing out some facial hair is because of my surgery and some of the I had some interactions, allergic reactions for following the surgery. So anyways, trying not to shave for now. So I just want to clear that up for everybody who was wondering, if anybody cared.
Corey, let me act on part of all of our listeners. Can you tell us all that the surgery went just fine and you have no issues?
Surgery went beautiful, Don. I'm so impressed. I know you've had tremendous experience. You've obviously dealt with University of Iowa on so many more serious notes, but surgery went great. I've had almost no pain throughout this entire recovery, and we're this is like 4 days removed, and I feel fine. I mean, it's not. I still don't have a ton of strength in that right shoulder. I did have an allergic reaction, which is not the fault of the physicians at the University of Iowa, but I was just amazed at the lack of pain following the surgery. So no, I couldn't be more pleased with their care at the University of Iowa. I'll give them that shout out for sure.
Yeah, it's a wonderful hospital.
We do have a call here. Thank you for calling. Oh, well, they just dropped off. They just dropped off as soon as I went over there. And I don't think that one was my fault, Don.
Good to know.
I think they're back. Let's try it again. Do we have you? Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Yeah, this is Pat O'Neill calling from Minnesota.
Hey, Pat.
Been a big fan ever since I was a big Iowa fan ever since I can remember. And I'm up there in age now, but I had a couple points on the game. I want to thank Don for going over APs for Alex's stats there. That really means a lot. I thought Alex really has been playing great and doing the right thing when he's out there. And, of course, he doesn't have a whole lot of time, so he has to get things done quickly. So I really appreciate what Don went over with all the stats on him. I have a question about the running backs. It seems to me like sometimes I need to hesitate more because another hole opens up on the other side of the line. and they sometimes pick the wrong line and they might get a yard or two. Or if they would have picked the other side of the line, they may get 5 or 6. Now, I know that's a split-second decision by the running back, but I wonder if that's maybe a case of not always, trusting the line as well. Because we've had backs in Iowa before that kind of hesitated first. And it always seems like, most of the time they pick the right side of the line to go to. But I just wanted to get Don's reaction to that.
It's easy to second guess a running back. He's got to make a split-second decision as to where to go with the ball. We refer to it as vision. Some backs have great vision and can seemingly always pick the right path. Others have poor vision. But it's hard to be right all the time. The guys with good vision are right most of the time. And even then, sometimes they're wrong. And it's all happening just in a matter of a split second. So it's difficult to be right all the time. I think in general, Tyler's a patient runner. He picks his way pretty well. There are times, of course, when we're frustrated that he gets tackled for minus yardage. But sometimes in his defense, there's really not any good place to go. So it's a problem. It's difficult to be right all the time. The really good backs are right most of the time.
Okay, thanks. The other thing I wanted to mention is this goes back to the Minnesota game. I was actually yelling at the TV set when they had that trick play, which was the pass over the middle that went for a touchdown. I mean, we had everybody on the line of scrimmage. To me, it was like, watch out for a pass over the middle. And I just don't understand why the coaches didn't pick up on that.
I'm sure the coaches were thinking it might be play action because that's what football teams sometimes do. The disappointment, Matt Hankins is an experienced player, and you wouldn't expect an experienced player to get fooled on that. The bottom line, of course, he's sitting out in space. He's manned up on the tight end. Can he really affect the outcome of the play if the fake is up inside? He's not going to matter anyway. So all you need to do, and of course it's reminded to the players all the time, just honor your responsibility. Just do your job. Don't focus on somebody else's job. Do your job. Matt's job was to stay locked onto that tight end, and he obviously didn't do it.
So he's got some freedom there, is what you're saying, Don. It's not like, Phil's saying, well, we're attacking the run here. If he's still got an assignment to where he's got to make a choice of how much to sell out against the run.
Yeah, his job's not to stop that fourth down run anyway. Unless the ball goes wide, of course, if the ball goes wide, he's got to enter into that. But the fake was up inside, and there was really no excuse for him to bite on that fake.
And one other comment I have, you're probably going to discuss, I assume you're going to cover this well towards the end, but I'm really worried about Nebraska because Martinez has really bothered us over the years. Anytime there's a running quarterback like that, we seem to have a problem with our zone defense covering that. So I'm really worried about the Nebraska game since they're playing all these other teams very close. They've got a good defense. And I just like to, maybe you want to save the comment until later when you cover Nebraska, but I'm just really worried about that game.
You can go ahead and touch on that, Don.
Yeah, you and me both. I'm concerned about it too. He's the definition of a combination quarterback. He is a runner, and he's also a very capable thrower. And they have a pretty good receiving core as well. If you don't think they're hard to defend, then just ask Wisconsin, because they had to score more than 28 to beat them. In this case, they scored 35, of course. Our defense is comparable to Wisconsin's, I'd like to believe. But that should suggest that it's not going to be easy to prevent them from scoring several touchdowns. And that obviously puts a little extra pressure on both offense and defense. Offense now realizes we're going to have to put up bigger numbers than we normally do. When I say bigger numbers, I just mean more points. It's going to be very difficult. I'd be curious, maybe you can look it up. When's the last time that somebody held Nebraska under 14 points? I don't know. It hadn't happened very much.
Might have been Illinois, week 0.
Yeah, you're probably right. What was that, 22 to 18 or something?
Something like that, yeah. I'll look it up.
Yeah. I'm just curious.
I think that's right.
They put up big numbers. If I'm not mistaken, they're averaging for the entire season 450 yards or more in total offense. And they don't have the points to back it up simply because they do turn the ball over more than the average team. And obviously that'll kill a drive immediately. But if they ever play a clean game, and by that I mean minimal turnovers, minimal penalties, then that means the other team's in trouble because they do move the ball up and down the field.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, I'd like to thank both of you for doing this show. It's great. Really enjoy it. Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate you listening and appreciate for the call. All right. Want to give a shout out to the outlaw Josie Wales. He says, hey, hi guys, your thoughts on containing Nebraska's receivers. Martinez, I know we touched on that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, Don. But he also brings up Minnesota. Can they beat Wisconsin this weekend? I'll be honest, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, but I had more confidence in Nebraska beating Wisconsin than I do Minnesota. Nebraska traditionally, and I'm talking the last 3 to 4 years, has matched up well against that Wisconsin defense. You could not say the same thing about Wisconsin. Maybe some early thoughts on that matchup, Don.
Well, one thing that is going to make it more difficult for Wisconsin to beat Minnesota is a score favoring Iowa versus Nebraska the day before. I think logically that'll put a little additional pressure on Wisconsin because now they'll have no choice but to win the game. And I know that Mertz has improved, but obviously if Minnesota can slow down their running game and require Mertz to play a bigger role, that might be a problem. You know, you hadn't had to do that very often, of course, because the running game's been so solid. But Minnesota's defense is pretty darn good too, and they certainly have a chance to rise to the occasion. And they would need to get off to a good start, I think. If they could be up on Wisconsin, there's a little additional pressure on the quarterback. And with a home crowd and a championship being on the line, maybe Minnesota could pull it off. I think there's certainly a chance that could happen.
I have something to add to that, but before we get to my comment, let's get to our next caller. Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame and on Iowa Live here at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Yes, I called you earlier in the season, right after the Minnesota-Ohio State game. I'm actually a pretty big Ohio State fan. I did want to comment a little bit on the Minnesota-Wisconsin game. I will say this about Wisconsin. Have you found it really interesting that Wisconsin's just gone back to being Wisconsin and tried to just run the football and just realized that maybe the Graham Mertz experiment wasn't worth it?
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, when you have a guy like Braylon Allen, who's basically a college version of Derrick Henry, Don, I don't know where I don't know where they find these kids. I mean, when you see Jonathan Taylor go for 5 touchdowns today against the Colts, they just find these kids and they're running behind exquisite offensive lines.
And in the case of the freshman phenom, they had to go no further than Fond du Lac, Wisconsin.
Isn't that crazy?
He's not yet celebrated his 18th birthday.
And they were talking about playing him at safety.
Well, they made a good decision.
What I found, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to add what I found interesting is I was big on Graham Mertz, coming into the season. Maybe I was buying a little some of his recruiting hype, and I think that basically Paul Chryst realized that we've just got to try and become Wisconsin again if we're going to win games. And it just I find it interesting that he basically just said, you know what, we're going to have our quarterback do as little as possible right now. It's really interesting to me. They've kind of just done kind of an about face.
Well, here's the thing, though, caller, and this is just my belief. Yeah. I don't think Iowa. I don't know if you're implying that maybe Iowa should try. Iowa doesn't have the horses up front. The problem is historically under Kirk Ferentz there, and we talk about this every week. But there's this narrative that Iowa's ground and pound, and we just run the ball down people's throats. And that's just not the case. So Wisconsin can do that because they have the horses. They have the history of being able to run the ball down your throat. Iowa just can't do that. So it would be great. But, even Tyler Goodson, Don, and we've talked about Tyler and his draft stock or lack thereof. I hate to say this about Tyler. Tyler is not the back that Jonathan Taylor is, that Melvin Gordon was, that James White is, that Braylon Allen is. I mean, he's just not. I like Tyler. He's one of the better backs we've seen here. But would you agree with that, Don?
My guess is if you looked at the NFL in today's games, the average starting running back probably weighed 225 or 230. He's undersized compared to those guys that play on Sunday. Is there a running back in the NFL that's less than 200 pounds? There probably is, but obviously they have to take a pounding, and it's difficult for a smaller player to be able to do that.
And they're usually not every down guys. They're guys
Right.
like J.D. McKissick at Washington, or guys who are primarily pass catchers out of the backfield.
Yeah,
Caller, does
critical
that
downs.
answer the question?
Well, no. One thing about Iowa and observing them, and I don't know if you've noticed this. Obviously, I'm sure you would, being an Iowa fan. But where would you put this Iowa offensive line? Ranked among the Iowa offensive lines, let's say, of recent vintage in the Kirk Ferentz era, because it doesn't seem to me like in watching them that there's necessarily a lot of holes to run through there. If I'm not mistaken. I mean, I know what your thoughts are on the performance, particularly in run blocking with this line.
Go ahead,
Don,
Gary.
Okay.
You gonna take that?
I can start, and then if you want to add to it, I don't think it's one of the better ones, caller. I'll put it there. But at the same time, again, I'm judging this line and comparing it to a lot of lines under Kirk that have not been great in run blocking. And what's crazy about the issues with this offensive line, caller, is they have one of the better, and I'm not saying he's the best, but one of the better singular offensive linemen to play under Kirk, and Tyler Linderbaum. I think he's that good. And so when you're this poor, I mean, again, they're feast or famine. We see the go, a 10-yard run followed up by a -4-yard run. But when you are not able to run the football effectively with a guy like Tyler Linderbaum at center, it means you've got some problems. And of course, they haven't been good in pass protection either. So I would probably put it in the bottom 4 or 5 at least, and maybe lower on the poll. I mean, I'm thinking of like obviously 2000 or the early years of Kirk Ferentz, like the Liddell Betts era. Iowa struggled up front during that time frame as well. They weren't good in 2019, I can tell you that, especially on the interior. Don, do you have anything else to offer on that question?
Well, the only other thing I would mention, when you look at quality control, one of the things we always were able to do, we would look at every last running play in our offense, and at the end of the season, we would know what the average was per play on any particular run concept that you could think of. And then we would also have another stat that's important, and that would be the percentage of those runs that was 4 yards or more. Because that's really what you're looking for, is consistency with your running game. If you can gain 4 yards or more a high percentage of the time, then obviously that's a play you should think about running even more than you already are. In other words, yards per attempt can be misleading. Yards per rushing attempt can be misleading. Maybe it averages 7 yards a play, but maybe an 80-yard run that put everything out of whack. Maybe if you looked at the big picture, it was 4 yards or more just 20% of the time, or maybe less. Well, if it's only successful 20% of the time, that's not good enough. And a team like Wisconsin that runs the ball so effectively, you can bet some of their running achieve 4 yards or more a pretty darn good percentage of the time. Something over 50, I would be willing to bet you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't think this was one of the better Wisconsin offensive lines early in the season. At least it didn't look like it, from what I saw early on. I wanted to get one last comment in, being an Ohio State fan. I just wanted to see if you guys kind of had an early view on the game this week. Is there any reason to believe that this Michigan team is that much better than the Michigan teams that Ohio State has faced in the past? Let's say either on the defensive side of the ball or particularly at quarterback in the passing game. Just maybe your guys' early thoughts on that game.
Well, I certainly think Michigan has a chance to play in Ann Arbor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me, I mentioned a week ago, Bo Schembechler would be smiling about this Michigan team right now because it would remind him a little bit of some of his old teams. Sound defense, excellent running game, a passing game to complement the run. And as I understand it, as the season's played out, there have been any number of different receivers that have stepped up and made plays from one week to the next. So I think that receiving course is improving as the season plays out too. And the fact that they're playing in the big house, that could help. Ohio State's a daunting team. There's not a better offensive team in the country. But I still think the Achilles for Ohio State could be their defense. Michigan's got a good run game. I think it's entirely possible that Michigan can stay right there with them. I do think that Michigan's going to give up points because I think Ohio State will score points against anyone. But it'll be, I think, a good game. I hope it'll be a good game. I don't have a dog in the fight. It doesn't really matter to me. I just want to see good football, and I suspect you're going to see good football out of both teams.
I have a dog in the fight, Don. If Iowa can make it to Indy, I do not want to play Ohio State. So I'll be rooting. If Iowa wins, I'll be rooting for Minnesota Saturday and Michigan on Saturday as well, caller. And I'll go along with that from Don. I think what's impressed me about Michigan, and I'd have to look back. I'm not a Michigan Wolverine fan, but if I look back at previous seasons under Jim Harbaugh, where there's been a lot of hype going into this game, I don't recall Michigan blowing out opponents like they've been blowing out opponents. So that tells me perhaps there is a game. I mean, of course, there have been close games. I think of wasn't there an overtime game, 5 or 6 years ago, right? When Jim Harbaugh first started, that was wasn't what I can't remember what year that was, but there was the
JT Barrett play game where he didn't get the debate about did he get the ball over the line.
Right.
It was the double overtime. That was really the closest Harbaugh came to beating Ohio State.
No, I think it'll be a good game. I'm looking forward to it. That'll be a great game to watch Saturday.
Yeah,
and I haven't said that every year.
I just wonder how, maybe if this compares to maybe some of his previous teams, because I know they've been really strong in the front seven and really strong on defense, like particularly their 2018 team and even their 16 team. That was the strength of those teams. And, offensively, they've been good. But, the one thing with Harbaugh, to me, he's never necessarily had a standout quarterback, which is, obviously the biggest thing in football nowadays. I mean, but although McNamara does look better the last few games for them, and I know that Haskins is a really good running back. I certainly think they can match up with Ohio State in the trenches. I think their offensive line and their defensive line are really, really good. But, Ohio State's offensive line has been really good at pass protection. So if he has time, I just don't know if their corners can hold up. And the last 2 times they played Ohio State, their corners have had a really bad day against Ohio State's wide receivers.
Sure.
So that's kind of my early thoughts on it, because even if they keep Ohio State in the 30s too, which I think would be a major accomplishment, I still wonder about McNamara. And Ohio State's defense is suspect, although I do think it's getting a little bit better, particularly on the defensive line. Some of those higher-ranked guys are starting to play better. I just wonder if McNamara in that passing game can make enough plays to score in the 30s, though.
I wonder, too, but like Don brought up, the Ohio State defense hasn't been great until yesterday. It was great yesterday, but it hasn't been great all year. So we'll see. Should be a good one.
Was it just 2 weeks ago when Ohio State played at Nebraska? Wasn't that 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it was.
That comes to mind for me.
Ohio State held Nebraska to 17. I forgot about that one, Don.
Yeah, and they needed to, right?
Yeah,
it was still a one. What was the final score? I can't remember.
It was 26-17, if I recall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so the game was in doubt for the longest time.
Lowest point total of the year.
Yeah, so Nebraska can play defense too. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I love the show.
Appreciate
if I were a betting man, I'd still bet on the Buckeyes.
Absolutely would agree with that. And before we get to our next caller here, I see some new people in the chat this evening, which is nice to see. All thumbs. Hello from Denver, Colorado. Iowa fans gather here for Hawks on the Rocks. I don't know what that is, Don. Maybe I'm ignorant, but if All Thumbs wants to tell us what Hawks on the Rocks is, sounds cool, whether it's a frou-frou drink or something involving a mountain out in Colorado. I don't know, but it sounds cool. So appreciate seeing All Thumbs here, as well as Rob Dingeldorf. I don't know that I've seen his name before either. Charlie runs like a deer. He's got the green light, and he did so yesterday. And he does. He makes some interesting decisions at times, but more often than not, it's a positive when Charlie Jones has a football. And boy, that 100-yard run yesterday turned the tide of that game. Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame and Iowa Live with the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Yeah, this is Greg from Phoenix.
Hey, Greg, how are you
Hawkeye
tonight?
fan.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Say, I was wondering what Don thought about Iowa's red zone offense. I mean, that play where I can't remember what the situation was, but I think Charlie ran it back to the 47 on a punt return. They got 2 15-yard penalties. I think they ended up on the 17. And then he ran that reverse pass to Padilla. They got the roughing the passer call, and they ended up on the 8 and ended up with a field goal. And it seems like they took a lot of field goals down in the red zone.
Yeah, our red zone offense isn't good.
I do have that possession marked here. It was 1st and goal at the 8-yard line, following the punt return, the penalty yardage. On 2nd down, we ran a fly sweep for -4. 1st down, as I recall, might have been inside the tackles for minimal gain, maybe a yard. The fly sweep, the problem with the fly sweep, if you're looking at an overhang player that's you're convinced is coming up the field, good luck out flanking him. When I say an overhang player, I mean he's someone that's physically outside of the offensive tackle. And it's easy for him to see the fly sweep coming and to get up the field and obviously to have a chance to mess up the play for the offense. And that fly sweep was -4. And I had no issues at all. The field goal gave us a 7-point lead, but we were only up by 4 at the time. It was 20-16. So I'm thinking, even on those first 3 downs, I'm thinking there's a big difference in having to kick a field goal here. It's still a 1-score game and scoring a touchdown. And now you're up 11 rather than 7. Big difference. So your play calling on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd down should be designed for sure to get you in the end zone. The way we'd run blocks throughout the game, we made a lot of yards between the tackles, or for sure between the tight ends. So I was just a little disappointed we didn't try to hammer them at that point. And I don't know what the best play is, but I guarantee they've got a good idea what the best play is. So for whatever reason, the fly sweep was out of place. You know, we'd run a few too many. We'd had success with the fly sweep before, but I think we went to the well one time too often, that's for sure. They'd seen enough of it, and they hit it in the head. And we were, it seemed as if we were a little too content just to settle for 3, because that was a great chance to go up 11 rather than 7.
Yeah, and then I think there was another time when we had, I think Goodson and Williams ran for like 2 15-yard runs, and we got down to 12 or something like that, and then they just stalled out, kicked another field goal.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
It happens a lot. It's of course, Don, we always hear that the field shrinks when you're in the red zone, so it does change how you play. Although Iowa wasn't really getting a lot downfield in general yesterday. They did try the pass back to Padilla, which I just like seeing something different, Don, and I wonder if that's out of the Bill Belichick handbook. And it did draw a pot. I mean, it drew a roughing the passer. I don't know if you can directly attribute that to the play call, but it ended up being a free 1st down on that pass back.
We're a little lucky that there wasn't an injury timeout on that play, because Reganey almost got he could have had his head taken off on that play. I think
to me,
in the end
that was targeting.
They did not eject him, though. They did not eject him, right?
I don't know. We've talked about that issue before, and I know you didn't call to talk about targeting, caller, but the issue of targeting continues to be one of those that makes no sense to me, because it's not called consistently. I thought if you launch up and at a player's head, that's targeting, right? By definition. And that's exactly what that Illinois defender did yesterday. He launched at Reganey's head, and yet they reviewed it and said no targeting. So anyways.
How about the Schulte targeting call? That was like ridiculous. The tight end, like 6'5" or something, and he obviously led with his shoulder, and it was.
Yeah, you're right. The penalty was marked off. He wasn't ejected, but the penalty was enforced, right?
Yeah, they called it.
I think the penalty was, but he got to stay in the game.
Right. Yeah, another comment about the reverse.
That's all I had to say.
All right, caller. Thanks for the call.
Just as I was talking about running fly sweeps with an overhang that you're convinced is going to be coming off the edge with some width. Obviously, you can pull up a fly sweep if you got a defender doing that. Same thing on reverses. Be really careful running reverses against pressure off of an overhang position. Again, that's exactly what we had that time, and that's why he kissed Reganey right underneath his chin there on that play. We were lucky to even get the ball off.
But Don, you had to like at least seeing us try something like that, right?
Right. And the only caution I would have is just be looking for an alignment that's going to be more conducive to being able to complete the play. If the widest rusher is tight on that offensive tackle, now he's going to be inside pretty far, and now you got a good chance to outflank him with the reverse man.
And before we get to our next caller, Mark Duff says, not many deep shots by Iowa yesterday. Was Illinois playing extra deep, especially on the interception? Obviously, it seemed to me like they were set on taking away the deep ball, which Iowa had success with against Minnesota. Was that what you saw, Don?
You know, I let's talk about the double cut, the interception. First off, the routes weren't very good. You know, the main thing, I think we might have had both freshmen in on that particular play, but the bottom line, when you're going to double cut someone, don't get too fast with your route. You got to sell the underneath route, which then gives you a chance to clear the guy over the top. Padilla did the right thing. He actually pump faked on one side and threw to the other side. And you might say, well, that's crazy. Why wouldn't you pump fake to the same side you're going to throw to? The reason is that free safety back there is going to react, and this is where film study comes in. If he routinely reacts to the side of that first arm motion, then that's why you would pump fake one way and throw the other way to get the free safety moving the wrong way. First off, that free safety was really, really deep, and I give him credit. He really did a great job of breaking on the ball. That was a really nice play on his part. The only thing I wondered about, everything being equal for the double cuts, I think the ball was on the right hash. So I would have suggested if the alignments are similar on both the part of both receivers, pump fake into the boundary, because that free safety is probably pretty much over the ball. So if you pump fake into the boundary and you have a wide receiver to the wide field running the double cut, then that would give you a better chance of only having to beat one defender, not two. And the free safety made a great play on it. They're very good anyway. And that's why the ball ended up as an INT.
Let's be honest. I know 7 of those points came from Charlie Jones' return, but that's a good Illinois defense. We talked about that going in. That is a good Illinois defense. So just because of the stats didn't look great from Alex's standpoint, that was a solid. That's not an Illinois defense that we're used to seeing. Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame and Iowa Live here at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Corey, this is Vincent.
Hey, Vincent, how are you tonight?
Not too bad. I'll try to make it quick this evening. First thing, I know you had some celebrity comparisons. I kind of take offense to someone saying you look like Fred Savage, because to me, you're Topher Grace from that 70s show all the way. And Don, I know you don't want to admit it, or take credit for it, but I'm pretty sure you were a stunt double for Burt Reynolds and Boogie Nights. But anyway.
Okay, so maybe the reference was Don for Burt Reynolds. Who did you say I look like, Vincent?
To me, every time I see your show, you remind me of Topher Grace off of that 70s show.
I never watched that. Let me look up Topher Grace. Topher. Oh, you don't spell Topher.
To me, no Fred Savage, but Topher Grace for sure. And Don absolutely looks like Burt Reynolds. So kudos to Don.
Thank you, Vincent. I appreciate that. I will admit I've heard that more than a few times through the years.
Okay.
I take it as a compliment, because I think Burt Reynolds is above average.
Yeah.
Maybe only slightly above.
Sorry, guys. Corey and I kind of talked a little bit last night about the lack of pressure from our D-line. Just want to get that take from you, Don. Are you seeing the same thing, the lack of pressure from our defensive line or our front four? And if so, do you feel it's putting even more pressure on our DBs having to cover even longer?
Yeah. The dilemma that Phil Parker faces, if he wants to bring extra pressure, there is a thing called zone blitz. Zone blitz actually makes a lot of sense. You know, if you're not getting good pressure with 4, then maybe putting a 5th rusher into the mix and simply vacating a zone maybe that's a good option. What we know is not a very good option if teams have any kind of game-breaking ability at wide receiver is going man. I'll just remind you of the Purdue receiver running down the field when he was able to avoid his man defender and then run for 60 yards. So, that's why it behooves us to be able to get pressure with 4. And in general, we've done a decent job of that. We can always improve, of course. It did seem that Illinois did a better job of pass protecting maybe than they did run blocking, because I don't recall a lot of duress for the quarterback, and it seems like in general he had a fair amount of time to pick out his receivers. And we did end up
Corey made a good point last night. He was talking about if you kind of quick in your head take a look back at our last few opponents. You look at Peters from Illinois, Tanner from Minnesota, obviously the kid from Purdue. When I keep kind of looking back at those games, I keep seeing each quarterback, before he's tossing it to one of his receivers, he's kind of quick doing a grocery list. There's just no pressure on the quarterback from our front 4. And I know for Iowa, like Corey was talking about last night, we just don't have the horses for it. But I think, for us going against Nebraska, it's gonna be even more prevalent when you see us going against Adrian Martinez, because if he can't find somebody open, we certainly don't have the guys really to track him down outside of, I think, Joe Evans. But that really is an athletic guy that can track him down, nor can we just get pressure on the quarterback. I just see each quarterback we're facing, it's like they just have an ample amount of time in the pocket to allow receivers routes to develop, and then they're finding them downfield, and it's just putting our DBs in a compromise or in a tough spot.
Yeah, looking here.
Go ahead, Don.
I was going to say, looking here at yesterday's parameters, we were even with Illinois on sacks. I don't know if we each had 1 or each had 2. I can't recall, but I do know we were even. I know Logan Lee had a sack, but I can't remember another one, honestly. Maybe there was one, but I can't recall.
And again, I've been saying this for a week. They tend to get home when they're successful, able to pull off stunt rushes, but they're not able to do so one-on-one, because I just don't think they have that one-on-one guy. And typically with the best Iowa defensive lines, they've had at least one star either on the inside or outside, being Davion Nixon, AJ Epinesa, even Chauncey Golston. You could at least say was more of a physical specimen than anybody they have on the line this year. I mean, Van Valkenburg is probably your best guy. In my opinion, he probably shouldn't be your most dynamic defensive end. It's just not a great year from an athletic standpoint, Don.
Yeah, one mismatch in terms of edge rusher that we've had some success with is, of course, Joe Evans. But I can't honestly remember, as I watched the TV tape, I can't honestly remember seeing Joe out there a lot. I don't know. Maybe he's got some kind of minor injury. How many snaps did he get? I don't know, because he wasn't nearly the factor that he was a week earlier. Not sure what kind of numbers Joe had. He's obviously it's difficult to block Joe because he's quicker than the average defensive end, because he's lighter, of course, and he can accelerate a little bit quicker than the average edge rusher. Corey, I guess you're looking at the stats now.
I'm trying to pull it up here, but I don't remember seeing Joe Evans much yesterday either. I'm sure he was out there, but I don't know that he had a very. I mean, he certainly didn't stuff the stat sheet. I can tell you that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I didn't see anything impactful now that you guys are mentioning it. And usually, if Joe can't get to the quarterback, he'll at least create some pressure.
You're right. Or we'll get a holding call every now and then because of Joe. Joe's giving us a lift in long yardage, no doubt about that.
Yeah, just his football knowledge or his football savvy. He's a shorter guy, lower center of gravity, can kind of get around the corner. It seems like quicker than our other, starting D line. But yeah, you're right. I don't recall I'm sure he was playing, but I don't recall anything jumping out of the screen yesterday during the game. So maybe it was just a quiet game.
Well, let me tell you, he had 1 solo tackle and 1 assisted tackle. And it says here, he did have a sack for 9 yards, Don.
Yeah, and that was because some other player got there first. I think it was Van Valkenburg, right. And then Joe was the cleanup guy. So you're right. I forgot about that one. But that wasn't Joe with the initial contact. He
Right.
got credit for the sack when Van Valkenburg really had the pressure. I believe it was Van Valkenburg.
Go ahead, guys. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Vincent.
I do feel Logan Lee is going to be a real good one. The kid's a sophomore. He's actually kind of from the area where I'm at. I'm from the Quad City area, from Bettendorf. He's from kind of right across the river in Orion. So local kid. I do think he's going to be really good. He's only a sophomore, big-bodied kid, especially the D tackle position. I think he's going to be a real good one going forward. But Corey, you kind of alluded to it yesterday. You don't see anybody on the roster that really gives you some, I guess, hope, in the immediate future as far as pass rush ability. My next question, guys, or probably more so primarily for Don. I know it's kind of a loaded question because you're, an ex-Iowa staffer. You've worked with Kirk. If you were head coaching this team, would you be opening up the offense quite a bit more? And what I mean by that, would you go to more offensive sets where you have multiple receivers, stack receivers to both sides? Would you do anything different to open up the offense to try to get the ball downfield more? And the reason I ask that, gentlemen, is you guys have both talked about it and probably more so, or talked about it, and more so Corey, about our recruiting of quarterbacks within the state. And we've had some good ones that have come up in recent years that have gone to play elsewhere. You look at Max Dugan that out of the Council Bluffs area that ended up going to TCU. So the reason I ask that is because when we have the quarterbacks, the stud quarterbacks, and I agree with you, Corey, like you were just talking about earlier in the show, our offense is not built to really recruit in these high profile quarterbacks. Now, granted, we can get the linemen. Yes, we can get your defensive players, but your skill position players, your quarterbacks, your wide receivers, they're going elsewhere. You look at Amara Darbo, went to Michigan out of the Des Moines area. You look at Oliver Martin, obviously his first choice was in Iowa, went to Michigan, came in for a cup of coffee, then left to go to Nebraska. It's just, I wish we would open up the offense more. And again, Don, if you were in that position, would you? And if you would, how so?
Well, fundamentally, I'd take more shots. I'd have more plays in the offense that were designed to be big plays. You've heard me talk about it before. I know Corey's heard it at least. You have to game plan with certain plays that are designed to make big yardage. And it's got to be on sound film study. And you practice them, and we have, maybe you got 4 or 6, whatever, at least 4 plays that these plays have a good chance. And we're going to have to protect a little while because it's going to be a longer throw. And maybe we even have to change up our protection in that we maybe keep a tight end in, or we block with a fullback in the backfield rather than a running back, stuff like that. And you design those plays that if you hit on them, they're going to be 30, 40, 50-yard plays or maybe touchdowns. And you call them at the right time. And the quarterbacks understand this is a play that's designed strictly for man coverage. This one over here is strictly for zone coverage. And if it's designed for man and you don't get man, then get out of the play. We'll turn around and call it again. In other words, don't waste it. But if you had 4 of those in every game and you hit on 2 of them, that would be 2 super explosive or explosive plays at least, probably super explosive, probably 30 yards or more, that would maybe be a difference in the game. And the prime example I come back to is the play at the end of the Penn State game. That was a very well-conceived play, and thank God we called it when it mattered the most. It was the middle of the 4th quarter when we hit that. And that play was designed to be a home run, and it was a home run. So we just need to do more of that, that's all. And for that matter, the other thing I'd consider doing more of is have some exotics for every game, because the thing that happens with exotics, with trick plays, even if they don't work, it reminds the other team, you better be a little bit on guard. Don't be flying to the ball too fast because you might be wrong. And that slows down the pursuit, and that gives you a better chance to make yardage with all those other plays that are part of your routine offense. Hope that helps.
Yes, sir. I couldn't agree with you more, because you see a lot of the defenses that we go up against, they're doing that very thing. They're coming downhill fast. They're not respecting a whole lot behind them, because they're just not. There's no threat of any type of exotic or those type of plays that they have to make sure that they're respecting. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So yeah, that does answer the question. I was curious if you would do more things to open up the offense, which I would assume that you would have.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean empty all day long. I'm not a proponent of that, but it's simply a variety of formations, and you can have exotics out of any number of those formations, but they need to be well conceived. They need to be well thought out. I've always said effective film study is continually asking the question, what if? In other words, you see something on video, maybe it's simply a running play, but the obvious question off that running play you're looking at on video is, what if it was a play action fake instead of a run? Look how the secondary is reacting to that particular play. Let's go with a play action pass that takes advantage of the way they're reacting to this particular backfield action. And those are the very best trick plays that maybe you don't even think of it as a trick play. It's just a play action pass, but it's a play action pass that's designed to work, and you have an idea that it's going to work because you've seen any number of formations, identical formations, that have gotten a very similar result out of the defense. And in that regard, it's very predictable how they're going to react to it. So let's take advantage of it. Nobody else has. Let's be sure we're the first ones to do it.
Yeah, taking advantage of an aggressive defense. I mean, catching them off guard. Corey, I'll ask you the same thing. Would you prefer to now? And Don, just to kind of clarify, I wouldn't go to, or I guess I wasn't saying going to a spread type of offense. I'm not a fan of those, or primarily a spread. But having a package in there, Kirk having a package of spread formations or spread offense in there, so you can go to that. Let's say either to pick up tempo or to get the ball moving, get your quarterback and receivers in rhythm. That's what I would like to see. Corey, what do you think?
I'd open up the offense more.
Right?
Yeah, I would.
But go ahead, Corey. Sorry.
I just said I absolutely would. I wouldn't go empty constantly like Don brought up either, especially if I have a statue at a quarterback. But no, I'd like to see exotics, and I'd like to see more ingenuity with trick plays, which we did a lot of in 2017 and 18, and they worked. But I'll never be the OC, I can tell you that.
I'll give you a simple example that's working, that has been working right now for Michigan State. If I'm not mistaken, Michigan State's has run pitch back to quarterback, I think 4 times this year, and I think they've hit on all 4 of them. Now, they're a downhill offense, of course, and it's obvious that pitch back to quarterback, if you have an All-American candidate at running, there's a pretty good chance that play will work from time to time. But again, you got to be studying the other team, and you got to call it at the right time.
Right.
Yep. No, I agree. I'm on the same page as Corey. I know you have a lot of callers that call in and or tweets or messages about, getting Brian Ferentz out of there as OC. I agree with Corey. It's not going to happen as long as Kirk's there, nor is the offense going to change while Kirk's there. And you kind of feel a little asinine saying it, because here Kirk has come in 23 years, and we're here we are at 9-2, and some of us are still kind of out there complaining because now that ceiling is set that, hey, we know we can get to 9-2, but why can't we get over that hurdle or that hump of getting into the college football playoff and trying to make an impact? So you kind of feel like, hey, let's not ask for too much or want too much. But I guess that's the part of sport, is you want to be, especially as Hawkeye fans, you want to see your team be successful and reach those those pinnacles, getting to a Big Ten championship game and winning it, and then moving on to the college football playoff and at least seeing what you can do. And myself, I definitely or certainly like to see some packages or some schemes in there for some spread.
Yeah.
Lastly, I just wanted to, I guess, kind of agree with Don on when I first started or when I first clicked in and listened to you guys. Don was talking about, and you, Corey, about some of the drops. And Don kind of hit the nail on the head, not surprisingly. When you have receivers that, or as a receiver, which is a position I played and the position I coach, you have to be able to gain separation from your defender, based on what kind of coverage you have. And I know we have young guys, freshman receivers, and Bruce and Johnson. Laporta isn't an underclassman, but if you're not gaining separation and you have a DB on your hip, it's going to make it a lot harder to haul those passes in, because by the time it gets there, you got a DB there trying to break it up or crawl on your back. And yes, it also doesn't help, like Don was saying, if you have a quarterback that's putting those balls on your upper left shoulder, because it's going to cause too many issues trying to catch it, and even more so for that ball ricocheting or bouncing off and going to the defense, because more oftentimes than not it does. So Don made some very key points on that, and couldn't agree with him more. Gentlemen, certainly appreciate the time as always. Corey, you and Don do a great job with the show, and keep it up, fellas. Love listening.
Appreciate it, Vincent. Thanks for the call.
Thanks for the call.
Okay, and I first of all want to thank our next caller for waiting. Before we get to our next caller, though, I'm getting behind on some of these questions in our chat. One being from a Mr. Ramon Ochoa, who I think is the Ramon Ochoa who was a pretty darn good punt returner for Kirk back in 2003. I could be wrong on that. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, Ramon. But he says, is Charlie Jones healthy? So kind of irony there that he'd be asking about a punt returner. How many points do we need to beat Nebraska? Charlie Jones is a tough kid. We saw him come in after getting hurt multiple times on Saturday. I have no doubt he'll be ready to play on Friday. How many points do we need to beat Nebraska Friday, Don?
Well, I would think a minimum of 28, to be honest with you. I'm just concerned because they got 28 on Wisconsin. If they got 28 on Wisconsin, playing at Wisconsin, I'm concerned that they might get 28 on us also. So this is one of those games. I hope we take this approach. We go on the field with the mindset we got to put up points, which means we got to call it an aggressive game. Much like we did. I lose track of the games now. When was a couple of games ago, we called an aggressive game. Which game was it?
Last week, Minnesota.
That's right. It was just Minnesota last week. And thank God we did, because those shots made a difference.
Yep.
We wouldn't have beaten them if we hadn't hit on a couple of those aggressive calls. So I'm suspecting we need to have that approach and need to be able to connect on some explosive plays.
And I'm sure Ramon appreciated the 100-yard kickoff return from Charlie Jones yesterday. Rob brings up, looks like a shoulder stinger. I don't think we got any official word from Kirk on that yesterday. And I know Brian did. He commented here, Hankins didn't play. We were talking about Minnesota when he blew the coverage on the Minnesota tight end. He did not play yesterday against Illinois. So let's get to our next caller. Thank you for calling Iowa at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Yeah, this is Pat O'Neill again from Minnesota.
Hey, Pat.
And I just wanted to say that I go back many years, and before Hayden got there, at some games we would cheer when we got a first down. So I'm one of those Iowa fans that when we go 10-2 or 9-3, I'm still pretty happy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to ask Don if, and maybe you too, Corey, if you would have our quarterbacks pump fake more. I love the pump fakes quarterbacks, and it seems like we rarely do that. And when we do, most of the time we're successful. I'd just like to get your feedback on that.
We did call a sluggo yesterday. It didn't work. And the only point I'd make there is, let's be sure we don't just guess with calling a sluggo. A sluggo is simply a slant route and then a go route off that slant. And what should happen when you establish the slant, the corner aggressively takes a path inside of you to contest that slant throw. And at that point, you can clear him outside. We ran a sluggo against a corner that wasn't close to being beaten. He played it well. Our quarterback had to pull the ball down. That might have been the one sack. that was in there. So, the main thing is to realize who you're fooling. You run the sluggo route against a corner that's really aggressive on slants. And if he's not aggressive on slants, then don't go to sluggo because it's going to be a waste of time.
Okay. The other thing is, Don, were you a defensive back when you played?
Yes. I would like to have been a quarterback, but my arm wasn't good enough.
Well, I did a little search on successful coaches, and maybe 20 to 25 of our most recent successful coaches. I even included Hayden in this, of course, because this is when I started believing it. I think quarterbacks, former quarterbacks, and also defensive backs make the best coaches. And if they're not the head coach, they're the offensive coordinator because they're more creative on their calling. And I just wanted to get your feedback on that.
I do think in general, now I can think of a few really play callers that were former O-line coaches, but in general, I do think that old quarterbacks make the best play callers because they think in terms of the big picture and probably have the most imagination for game planning in general. And obviously to be a successful quarterback, you got to be a quick thinker, and to be a good play caller, you got to be a quick thinker also.
And one other thing I want to mention is I wondered if we should be have one of our fastest defensive players shadow Martinez with the Nebraska game.
Yeah, we better be ready, not just for Q draw, but for Q power and any number of other. Just realize this: if he's in the backfield with a back, then there's all kinds of two-back offense they can run with he and the running back in the backfield. The running back simply becomes the lead blocker for the quarterback. And of course, in game 12, this is Martinez's last game, and I guess there's a chance he'll be back next year. I understand he has another year if he wants it. But the bottom line, of course, there's no game the following weekend for him. So it wouldn't surprise me if he runs the ball more than normal. We certainly have to be prepared for the possibility that he's going to carry the ball maybe as many as 10 or 12 times. And there's also a zone read that figures in too. You know what I mean by zone read? The guy that's on the edge of the box belongs to the quarterback. And now that means you're not outnumbered in the box because your 5 linemen can account for 5 and the quarterback's accounting for that edge rusher. If the edge rusher closes hard on the mesh, then the quarterback's going to pull the ball and run up the alley. And in Martinez's case, run up the alley for pretty good yardage. And so the frustration for that edge rusher is you better honor that quarterback, which means you're never going to make a play on the inside zone. But that's probably a safer way to go than to crash inside and let Martinez beat you up the alley. You know what I mean by up the alley? Not real wide on the play, but wide enough to clear the box outside the tight end or the imaginary tight end, if there wasn't one.
Do you think Norm Parker will do that?
Phil Parker?
Phil, yeah.
Phil Parker, sorry.
That's okay.
Phil Parker, yeah.
Yeah.
Phil would not be offended by that, believe me, because he has great respect for Norm, as we all do. We have great respect for both of them, and rightfully so. I would be willing to bet you that our edge rushers will spend a lot of time with the way they're supposed to play Martinez. Maybe we'll control it by calls. Maybe there are times when we'll crash inside, just playing the percentages, and maybe other times we're honoring the quarterback and not playing inside. It could be controlled with an actual huddle call. Sometimes we can crash the play, and sometimes not. If we want to guess with the play caller, we can do that. But we certainly better have more than one way to defend inside zone. I'll say that, and that's just one example of how we can. Maybe when you crash that edge rusher on zone read, you're also crashing somebody into the alley. A strong safety is rotating down so that he's at least in good position to play Martinez on or near the line of scrimmage. So that's the way you can bait him into keeping the ball and yet having a tackler right there in front of him when he clears that edge rusher. Even then, we might not make the tackle because Martinez is above average at making a guy miss.
Anything else, Pat?
No, that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Pat, for listening. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, it's a little bit of game of cat and mouse at that point, but if you think you have a good handle on when to make that call, then obviously maybe you can win more often than you lose.
Coach, how did you feel the last time you ran out onto the field in an Army uniform?
I will say this. I do remember very well the last Army-Navy game was the fall of 72. The reason I bring it up is next December, I've already mentioned to Lisa, next December we're going to be at an Army-Navy game because it'll be 50 years from my last Army-Navy game. And back in those days, it was played in Philadelphia, not in the Eagle Stadium, but in the old stadium. That stadium seated around 100,000, as I recall. It was a huge stadium. And it was such an honor to be in the presence of so many that cared so much about Army-Navy. Let's face it, it goes way beyond the graduates of Annapolis and West Point. It relates to everybody that ever wore the uniform of one side or the other. So it's a neat game, and certainly it makes you proud to be an American, to be part of those kind of games.
The man here asks me, have I ever been to a game in Lincoln? The answer to that question is no. I have no interest in going to Lincoln unless it's for a basketball game, because that new stadium, that new arena I've heard is really nice. I would be interested in going to a Nebraska game there. I see some comments about the 10-year war being reignited. People wanting that Michigan game to be similar to the 2016 game, but of course Michigan fell in that one, despite the unbelievable effort against JT Barrett. The outlaw Josie Wales, Iowa's amazing Sean Green. Did he run behind a really good line back then? Was Sean just great without a good line? Just cannot remember. Well, let's remember, he's been the one running back who actually made it in the NFL. So Sean Green was just that good, Don. I mean, they had a good line in 2008, but let's be honest, Sean Green is the best back Kirk Ferentz has had. Maybe Liddell Betts. I mean, I know he had success in the NFL as well. So you could say Liddell and Sean, but I don't know who else do you go to after that.
I'm not that familiar with all the backs in Kirk's 23 years, but I know Sean Green was an awfully good one. And I do remember Kirk saying, when it came to the option of signing another great running back or signing another good offensive lineman, his comment was, well, a great running back is going to make all of our offensive blocking look a lot better. So let's go ahead and get the extra back.
Absolutely. Will's Wolverine report says, is this man, Don Patterson, aware that he is Burt Reynolds' twin? Are you aware of that, Don? Have you had DNA testing done?
I've heard that more than a few times through the years. And
this is
probably a better actor, I guess.
Our listener asks a more appropriate question for an Iowa call-in show. How will Iowa fare next year in Columbus? That's a great question. JT Stroud will be, or CJ Stroud, CJ Stroud will be there next year. So that'll be should be a great game if it happens. It seems like the Iowa-Ohio State game is just not, well, it hasn't happened in 4 years because the game last year was canceled due to COVID. So maybe they'll get him this year, Don. They might play him in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's possible.
People have asked me through the years, what's the most difficult stadium you play in? I always said it was the Shoe.
Okay.
And I'm basing it on a lot of really close games back in the 80s and 90s. And it was a difficult place to play. If you're in that closed end of the horseshoe and that north end of the field, it is so loud you can't even hear yourself think. And that's provided the game's close. I don't think the crowd noise last weekend was anywhere near that, because I think having 49 points at the half probably kind of takes away from the enthusiasm of the crowd a little bit.
I will say this, a lot of new names and faces, or not faces, but names in our chat tonight. And I love hearing where all of our different listeners are from, Don. It makes me feel like we're reaching a wide base. John from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. That's awesome. Go Hawks Friday from John. Good to hear from him. Dennis Barnes, Minnesota spoon-fed Iowa with a trip into the red zone with 3 penalties. Iowa's offense still couldn't do anything. Again, red zone offense hasn't been great. Matt Williams brings up LeVar Woods. Special teams play has been tremendous. And I could say the same thing about Kelton Copeland at wide receiver. As far as recruiting is concerned, it's been, in my opinion, exponentially better since Kelton took over, specifically landing Keegan Johnson. Arlen Bruce was a big get. Brandon Smith, Amir Smith-Marset. I mean, Iowa's wide receiver room was depleted when he took over. So both of those guys, but especially LeVar, because execution-wise, this is the best unit that I can remember at Iowa as far as special teams, Don.
Yeah, let's not forget about Caleb. What a wonderful place kicker. It's amazing that you feel he's almost automatic from even 55 yards. It's amazing that he can be so effective and so consistent. And he gets the ball up nice and high. I think he's going to have a chance to. You realize it's so difficult to make the NFL. On an average year, maybe there'll be 3 or 4 new kickers in the league at most, because when they kick, of course, they kick for the next 10 years.
Right.
Come to think of it, maybe the Packers are going to change kickers after this year too, the way Crosby's season has gone. But Caleb has a chance to be a kicker, I think, in the NFL. We'll see what happens. But regardless of that, he's an outstanding college kicker, and we're lucky that he's on our side.
Nebraska 27, Iowa 17, according to this Husker fan. He says he actually likes Iowa. Kind of hard to hate a team whose state is 10 minutes away from his home. He likes your coach, of course, talking about Kirk, I'm assuming, and how y'all play physical football. So nice to have a Nebraska fan, a friendly Nebraska fan on here this evening. Erica Goldberg says, moving forward, can Don please be play caller instead of Brian? She adds, Don actually knows what he's doing. Brian E. says Don for OC. And then Ramon Ochoa. Question for Don. And, of course, for the record, if this is the Ramon Ochoa that I think it is, Don did not know Ramon, right, Don? You didn't coach. I mean, obviously you didn't coach Iowa from 2000 to 2003. But he says Jones looks like a kid playing in the backyard. What Iowa player that you coached had the most fun on the field? That's a cool question, Don. What do you think?
I would have to go with Tim Dwight. And we had a lot of guys that had a lot of fun out there, but Tim was absolutely fearless, just like Charlie is. And every time he touched the ball on kickoffs or punts, you knew there was a chance that he was going to go the distance.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. Dennis Barnes, Iowa's offensive line did look better. Another Don for OC question or a comment. John asks, how am I doing after surgery? I'm doing well. If you missed that earlier, University of Iowa cinched me up well, and everything's going great. Championship D can get pressure with just the front four. They don't have that stud on the outside. Again, we talked about that as well. Matt Roth, certainly another guy we missed when talking about the great defensive lineman during the Ferentz era. Dolph called 2 sacks, $150 for each sack to the Children's Hospital from sponsor. So, and I think the stat sheet reflected that. They get to the quarterback, Don. It's just not consistent enough. And again, when you don't have that star on the outside, it seems to be you have a ceiling, right? As far as number of times you're going to get to the quarterback during a game.
Yeah, a good example years ago, you've heard us talk about him, was Leroy Smith. He was undersized, but he was so explosive, and he was kind of the earlier version of Khalil Mack. You know, Khalil Mack's a nightmare for any offensive tackle to block. And Leroy was that same way. I think he still has the Iowa single-season record for sacks, up around 20, I think, some ungodly number. And Joe Evans is not in the category of Leroy, but he's certainly a good alternative, especially when you can insert him into the game on third down. He's fresh coming off the bench. That poor old offensive tackle's been out there for 6 snaps in a row. And now all of a sudden he's got to block a guy off the edge that's a little bit quicker than the other guy that he was facing. And that's where the mismatch occurs sometimes, of course, and or a penalty, because Joe's drawn quite a few holding calls too.
Yep.
So, but I don't know. Maybe Joe was nicked up a little bit. He didn't have a huge impact this week as he did the week before.
Kevin Downey says, Coach, what was it that changed from Ken O'Keefe to Greg Davis and Brian Ferentz? I don't think a whole lot, Don.
I think that's the suggestion, is that nothing's really changed. It would be logical, realize, of course, all three have worked for the same head coach. And obviously Kirk is the head coach, certainly entitled to give that offensive coordinator, that play caller, a lot of marching orders to give him an idea. That's exactly what he should be able to do, is to control him during the course of the game. If he wants to run the ball, any head coach has the prerogative to simply direct to the play caller at any time in the game, run the football. That's really all he has to say. Or for that matter, if he wants to throw it, that's his call too. Or if he wants to declare you've got fourth down. That means third down is no longer critical. Now on 3rd and 2, I call 3rd and 2, knowing that we're going to go for it on fourth down anyway. That's the role of a head coach, and I'm sure Kirk does a good job of that.
Todd Hesselstein says, Corey, who was that QB named Ryan from Des Moines Dowling that transferred as well? Thought he would have gave us good production. That was Ryan Boyle, who transferred and had a very successful career quarterback at the FCS level at Indiana State, but he was a more mobile quarterback. Do you remember Ryan, Don?
I do, and I remember that he put up good numbers at Indiana State, and he was what you think of as a combination quarterback. He was a guy that could run. He was a little undersized, but I've always said there are no perfect players. You know, there's something wrong with all of them, and you could say with Ryan Boyle, we wished he was taller, but obviously he was a good quarterback, and he demonstrated that at Indiana State. Maybe he didn't get it done at Iowa, but obviously the competition has a lot to do with what you're able to show from one school to the next.
Todd goes on to say, probably too sexy for Ferentz ball. Ramsey says, will something as easy as a receiver in motion to chip the unblocked backside pursuit help some of those lost run plays, or will that clog things up more in the run game?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because number what was his number, 92?
Wagner.
The guy that had I'm sorry, what was the name?
Are you talking about Iowa, John Wagner?
No, they're number 92.
Oh,
anyway, the guy with all the TFLs, he had 5 or so. Wasn't it 92, I think?
Isaiah Gay.
Yeah, Isaiah Gay. He had either 5 or 5.5.
10 tackles. Yeah.
How many? 10?
10 total.
Yeah, some of those tackles, incidentally, he was just an edge rusher that's lined up with a little extra width, and he's just crashing down as flat as he can go into the backfield, and actually made some tackles on the other side of the center. When the back got hung up a little bit and was a little bit indecisive, it bought him enough time so that he could actually get there for -1 or -2. That did happen a few times. And the fact that he was a wide rusher gave him a chance to make a few plays on fly sweeps too. So those overhang players, if they have any width in their alignment, you better be aware of that, because they're going to be able to make some negative plays from that position.
Absolutely. Where did the comment go? Here it is. This is apparently not the Ramon Ochoa from the Ferentz era, Don. He says, I do not have the honor of being the actual Razor. Now, how common can the name Ramon Ochoa be? Especially in the Iowa realm, Don.
Maybe he just uses that as his handle.
Okay. Hey, wait, I haven't had dinner yet, so you're a lot quicker than I am right now. You're probably
That's all I can think of.
All right.
Maybe he was a friend of Ramon when he was in college, maybe.
There you go. Jeffrey Russell says, you're going down Michigan, go Bucks. I don't know what this comment is. What do you think of the Chinese product Ice Wallow who's linked with Illinois? Can you piece what that means together, Don?
No, I don't even want to try.
I don't know if we're talking about a player or we're talking about a ice product from China. I don't know, Don.
Please clarify, Sam.
Yes, please. Jeffrey Russell, he says, I would like to see Iowa in the Big Ten. I'm assuming he means championship game. He's sick of beating Wisconsin. We owe Iowa. Absolutely true. I'm sure Ohio State would love to see Iowa in the title game. And I do think Wisconsin, just being honest, I think Wisconsin has a better chance of beating Ohio State given how they play than any other team, including Iowa, in the West. So I'm sure Ohio State would rather see Iowa than Wisconsin. Span says Iowa has as tough a game as Michigan. I don't know about that.
I disagree.
But I know a lot of people who are worried about this game. I'm concerned about it. I don't want to say worried, but it is a concerning game given what we saw from Nebraska. We've seen it basically every week from Nebraska. John says Sargent was underappreciated. Yes, he was, but Sargent was not. He also is not Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon, James White, Monty Ball. He's not. And that's why he's struggling to stay on a roster in the NFL. He's sort of beat the odds to even get onto a roster. I think he's now with the Rams, but he was undersized, Don. He's a good pass catcher, solid runner, but he was undersized as well. As was Wadley and Goodson.
Yeah, I think sometimes so many of our listeners watch a lot of college football and maybe don't pay as much attention to the NFL version, but in general, those backs are bigger than they are in college. You don't see any small backs playing in the NFL. They're all typically 225, I'd say, on average.
Yeah, Ramsey brings up Sean Green had over 100 yards in every game that year, which is not hard for players like, again, the guys we just mentioned at Wisconsin to do, but at Iowa, that is it's incredible. And Sean Green is a guy that has been he's not an extrovert. Let's just say that. And I don't remember the last time I've heard from Sean Green. I would love to talk to Sean Green on our show. Last I knew, he was living in Florida, but just kind of been one of those introverted type guys, kind of like Ronnie Harmon, right, Don? I mean, just not. I mean, of course, for anybody that doesn't know, Don, you actually hired Ronnie Harmon as an assistant coach, but he was more of that introvert type. And I don't know, is that a running back thing, or that seems to be a common thing? We don't hear from Iowa running backs a lot once they moved on, with the exception maybe being LaShawn Daniels.
Yeah, I don't know much about. I don't even know when Sean was finished with his playing career.
Well, he left after 8. I mean, 8 was his 1 year, and again, he had over 1,200 yards. He had over 100 every game that year.
His last year with us was 08.
Yeah, and he declared early.
Yeah, and how many years did he play in the NFL?
At least three, and they were, I believe, all with. Well, no, he started with the Jets, I believe. Ended up with Tennessee. And he was never a top 10 back in the league, but he was a starter. He shared a lot of time. They kind of ran a 2-back system in New York for quite a while under Rex Ryan, but he was a fixture in that offense. I mean, he was what you call a successful NFL product.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's that old joke, NFL, you know what it stands for, right? Not for long. Meaning, right. Even if you make a team, you're not going to get to play very long. The average career for those that even make a team is something like 4 years. And running back, of course, has got a short life expectancy anyway because they take such a beating. So if you're able to play for 4 or 5 years in the NFL, then that's a significant accomplishment.
Mark Rogers hopped on here briefly. Appreciate this from Mark. He's reminding everybody, please subscribe to our Iowa channel. So I'm looking right now. We got 112 people listening, 84 of which are at the Iowa channel, 24 at the main channel, and then 4 on the Big Ten channel. We appreciate the fact that you've subscribed to the Voice of College Football, the main line, the main channel. But if you haven't already subscribed to our Iowa channel, even if you're not an Iowa fan, you're a Nebraska fan or Wisconsin, whatever, please subscribe. Help us get to 1,000. It helps our show. I think we're sitting around 845 subscribers right now. Once we get to 1,000, it helps us on a lot of different notes, especially in the YouTube algorithm. So please help us to do that. Please subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so. David says he's been watching the after-game streams since the Penn State game, sadly missing them live. Wanted to say I've enjoyed the games this season and your commentaries and analysis. Appreciate that, David. And this would be a good opportunity to bring up the fact that you can watch our shows on replay here on YouTube, but you can also listen to them in a podcast. All right. Now I'm going to pop this up here on the screen so everybody's aware. If you want to listen back to this show as a podcast, swing on over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm. I'll put it on the bottom ticker here. From the Hawkeye of the Storm on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Amazon, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if there's a platform that you don't see us on, let us know, and we'll get the podcast on that platform. But you can listen to every one of our shows, both with Don and with Coach Gary Close for the Iowa Basketball Show. You can listen back to the podcast version of that show. So appreciate David with the kind comment there. And again, thank you to the Outlaw Josie Wales from the Dakota Dunes, South Dakota. I'm loving all the different locations this evening. Andy, what could have been with Marcus Coker? Absolutely. And Don, you probably don't remember Marcus Coker because I think you were still coaching at the time. That would have been 2010, 11. I believe, and certainly injuries sort of derailed his career. But he was a specimen physically. He was a big
back,
back.
wasn't
He was. Okay. See if I'm missing anything here. Last call for the phone lines. We appreciate Don giving us a portion of his evening this evening. 860-499-3332. 860-499-3332. I'll go ahead and pop this up here in big print. So if anybody wants to call us before we wrap this thing up, and again, I want to conclude by talking about Nebraska, Don. But again, if anybody wants to call now. Forever hold your peace. I thought this was amazing. Somebody asked me this yesterday, Don, during our live show. They said, do you see Iowa being the underdog in this game? And my quick answer was no. I just didn't see that happening because although Nebraska plays everybody close, I know it's in Lincoln, given the history of this rivalry and the fact that Nebraska's not beating anybody. They're not beating anybody. They're playing people close. So I was shocked today to see Nebraska open as a 4-point favorite, Don. To me, that would be all over my whiteboard in the practice facility for Iowa this week. Am I right?
Are you familiar with the college game day with the Bear?
Yeah.
You know who there is? The Bear would say,
yeah, Falika.
I'm taking Iowa in the points.
Absolutely.
Pick that as one of the guarantees. Iowa will definitely cover that. For that matter, Iowa's going to win the game.
I would not be surprised to see the Bear pick that, although I don't even know if the Bear, that's a Friday game, so he may not have an opportunity. I don't know where they're at. I'm assuming they're at the Michigan-Ohio State game, so they will not have their show until Saturday.
If that line opened at -4, I guarantee you that line's going to get smaller.
I would hope so.
May still end up as the favorite, but it's not going to be 4 points. It's going to be.
And the over-under is a little bit larger than we're used to seeing, too. I think it was mid-40s, 43, 44, somewhere in there.
Yeah, not hard to believe. And, of course, it's a short preparation, and we're the one that has to travel. So, obviously, we're traveling on Thanksgiving, and then we're in place for a Friday game. We've had good luck with other Friday games over there, though. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott Frost has never beaten us.
Nope.
And
for that matter, early on in the series with Bo Pelini, there were some struggles, but Iowa didn't. I don't know what Kirk's record against Bo was, but it wasn't terrible. And certainly the Maryland game out there this year, Iowa played very well on a Friday, if that means anything, for what that's worth. We do have a caller here. Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame and Iowa Live at the Voice of College Football. Who's this?
Hey, this is Bill. How's it going, guys?
Good. How are you tonight?
Pretty great. Hey, Kirk's record against Bo Pelini was 1-3. He lost in 11, 12, and 14 and beat him in 2013.
Okay. All right. I was thinking it was maybe closer to 2-2, but 1-3 is not great.
Yeah. No, I wanted to weigh in on that Nebraska line. Somebody on Hawkeye Report posted that Iowa is 1-10 in their last 11 games as a road dog going back to 2016. I don't know if that changes your outlook on the Nebraska game. And I also wanted to throw in that Alex Padilla, I was all for him because he brings that mobility, but he seems to throw it to the other team more in 3 games than any Iowa quarterback I can remember in years. Thank God they can't draw or catch it, but it seems like Iowa's receivers can't catch his passes either. Does that concern you going on the road, going up against the Nebraska team that's been super mistake prone? You know, if we do not make mistakes and let them screw up, I feel good about our chances. But if we match them mistake for mistake, then their superior athleticism and home field advantage kind of come into play, don't they? Or
well,
I guess I'm wondering what you guys' thoughts are on that.
I guess I can go first here. I understand your concern with Alex throwing to their team. He did get very fortunate against Minnesota on a couple throws that should have been picks. But I may add, Petrus also had moments where he got away with some really bad throws. I think of would have been a pick 6 against Purdue when he throwing down deep into the red zone, and it was just simply dropped by the Purdue linebacker. Got away with that one. I think at this point, I think it's clear that Alex Padilla is not the answer for this offense. and I hope we didn't lose our caller. I think we lost our caller there, Don. I apologize if we lost our caller. I don't think he's the singular answer to the struggles offensively, but I think you have to look at this and say, I don't want to say lesser of two evils, Don, but you don't have a CJ Stroud or an Adrian Martinez even on this roster. So at some point, you have to go with the best available. His mobility makes him the best available, in my opinion, but he has flirted with trouble in these last couple of games.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if we started the game with the mindset, let's be sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Let's see if Nebraska repeats their history and makes some mistakes early on that we can take advantage of. That's traditionally what's happened. Just a reminder, if you win on turnovers, you almost always win the game. And Nebraska's got an alarming history. If you're a Nebraska fan, they tend to turn the ball over more than the opponent. And to make matters worse, Iowa tends to generate turnovers on defense. So if you're a Nebraska fan, I'm sure you're hoping somehow to be even on turnovers, because that'll be a departure from the past, because typically you lose on turnovers and penalties. Let's not forget penalties. As a matter of fact, I was going to bring that up. There was a huge disparity on penalties yesterday. 96 yards versus 22 yards. 74-yard differential. I went back and looked at last year's research on those 49 games that were played a year ago, and the team that had a 60-yard or more advantage on penalty yardage, in other words, they had 60 or more yards less than the opponent, they won 90% of the time last year. So that's another good indicator. If it's just a few yards difference in penalties, it doesn't really matter. But if you're talking about a 60-yard differential, it does matter. And in the case of yesterday, it was 74 yards. So that's going to contribute to any win, is all that penalty yardage. And just to remind people, it's not just the penalty yardage, it's the lost yardage that relates to the play that got negated to begin with. And it's, of course, tied into field position and tied into a penalty that keeps a drive alive, those kind of things. So penalties do matter, especially if there's a big separation from one team to the next.
Jermaine Jackson brings up Adam Robinson was another good running back, but he did have some issues, drug-related issues, if I recall, after the 2009 season. Brandon Wager ended up having a pretty good career at Oklahoma, got his chance in the NFL. So they've had some running backs fall through their grasp for various reasons. Again, Coker being one of those guys. Another guy who was underrated was Joel Hampton. Couldn't stay healthy here, transfers out, ends up playing for a while with the 49ers. So they've had some guys who have been close, and they've also had guys that have almost come here and then had tremendous careers. Eno Benjamin goes on to Arizona State, breaks all kinds of records, Don. And Iowa had him committed. He decommits, goes to Arizona State, and then you look at a guy like Melvin Gordon. He was close to coming to Iowa as well. Ends up going to Wisconsin. We know where it went from there.
Yeah.
All right. And I believe this is Span bringing up the forecast. Doesn't look like it should be an issue as far as the weather on Friday. Partly cloudy, high of 49. Boy, we've had great weather almost all year, Don, for these games. It's been a tremendous fall as far as Iowa weather is concerned. Nebraska's only good wins, Fordham, Buffalo, Northwestern. And, of course, Northwestern was lopsided. Was not a close game at all. Skylar reminds us, as always, Don, it's always a good way to end our show, that Don is the GOAT.
Thank you, Skylar. You're very kind.
John says, so Iowa is supposed to be a running team. Why don't bell cow backs come here? Yeah, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I think part of it might be the zone scheme as opposed to the gap blocking scheme. I don't know how else to answer that question. Don, you're an offensive coordinator. Is that part of it?
Well, my guess is opposing coaches that are recruiting those same running backs, they point out the reality of what really has happened. And even though we have a reputation of being a running team, if you look at the numbers and look at how many 1,000-yard rushers we've had versus Wisconsin or a few other people, obviously we don't measure up very well there. So you can bet that those opposing recruiters are doing a good job of educating those young men about the true numbers that are tied into Iowa's running game.
Charles Harris, Racinos, and Duncan won recent games versus Nebraska. Caleb Shudak could be critical this Friday, and that's absolutely true. And I have no doubt Caleb will be ready to rise to the occasion. And those two guys are perfect examples. Excellent kickers at Iowa, yet neither have been able to make it in the NFL. And you could say the same thing about Marshall Kane. Had a huge leg, has not been able to make it in the NFL. I would say Shudak's got an opportunity, but there's just no guarantees at that position. And by the way, long snapper is a problem, Don. And we've not talked about that. It's been an issue here and there this year, and they've not been able to figure out those issues. That is one thing that LeVar needs to get fixed.
Yeah, and I looked at that snap really closely. The truth of it is that snap should have been handled. And you heard me make this comment about Torrey early on. If he has any negative at all, he doesn't have many. Certainly, he's an excellent punter, but he doesn't have great hands. The reason I say that, I've seen him double catch a few balls. You know what I mean by double catch? He doesn't field it cleanly. He bobbles it a little bit, and as a result, he still hangs on to it, but he's a little bit late to get the ball out sometimes simply because he didn't catch it cleanly the first time. And that was a low snap, there's no doubt. And if you're as tall as Torrey, it's hard. People say, well, just drop down on one knee. Well, you got to keep your knee off the ground too, so that makes it more difficult. So if you're a tall punter and the ball is down around your ankles, it's not easy to feel that. And obviously it was a problem for Torrey on Saturday. And that was a huge play. Thankfully, I believe they started off with the penalty, as I recall, but we did hold them on that series of downs and forced them into a field goal. And at that point, of course, when the defense goes on the field in the wrong part of the field, the best you can realistically hope for is some kind of field goal attempt that maybe misses. In that case, that Illinois guy, he didn't miss either. He's an excellent kicker. And that will be a clear advantage for us on Friday. Nebraska's had all kinds of place kicking problems, and we haven't. And I think there's a good chance that'll continue through Friday.
Appreciate the compliment here from Todd. He says he loves the show and the Hawkeyes, so appreciate you listening, Todd, as always. So, and appreciate everybody who hopped on here this evening. I do want to bring up a couple more points. Tackling is starting to be an issue for some reason, Don, with this defense. It seems like we're missing a lot of tackles. I know our viewers have noted that as well. Have you noticed the same thing?
You know, one I recall, we haven't talked about it, but that first touchdown drive for Illinois, you'll find this interesting.
Went right down the field.
Yeah, 12 plays, 75 yards. But here's the frustrating part for me. They were three for three on third down.
Yep.
3rd and 3, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7. You might remember the 3rd and 3. Peters actually kept the ball, and it would have been difficult to tackle. It was Merriweather. It would have been a difficult tackle. It was out in the open field. If he has a clean tackle, he holds him short of that 3-yard gain. So he was kind of flying out of control to prevent him from gaining 3. Missed the tackle, and I think Peters gained 5 or 6 on that play. But they converted on 2 other critical downs. And here's the rest of the story. That was the first opening drive touchdown for Illinois in the entire season. That's the first time they scored on the opening possession. So that's alarming. Like you said, we seem like we have more trouble on that first possession than we do others.
Don, let me just add this to that. That's something I brought up yesterday. If there's any complaints about Phil Parker, and there are valid complaints, he's not a perfect coordinator. Nobody is. But this team consistently allows opposing teams to drive the ball and score, whether it be a field goal or a touchdown to start the game. I think even back to the Maryland game, a game where Iowa dominates. They forced 7 turnovers. It was 14-10 in the first quarter. Terrapins had the lead. Yeah. Iowa has issues early in games defensively, and at some point that's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah, a prime example comes to mind for me, Purdue and Wisconsin. And people that say, well, you know, if we have a chance to finish 10-2, how could you be upset with that? I wouldn't be so upset if those 2 losses were 1-score losses, but they were not. They were resounding losses. So let's not forget that we weren't close to winning. Even if we win 10 games, we weren't close to winning games 11 and 12. You know, so in that regard, realizing that they're both in the West, you know, we have to figure out a way to beat Purdue and figure out a way to beat Wisconsin too. Otherwise, we'll be struggling and need help to make it into Annapolis year after year after year.
And that leads me into this question from Yakov22. And I know Yakov22 is not a live and die Iowa fan. He says the smart guys in the desert put the Iowa win total at 8.5 wins. They have already exceeded that total. With that in mind, can we say it's already a successful season? I'm going to sound like sour grapes, Don, and I know you're going to probably tell me 9 to 10 wins is always a good, successful thing. In my opinion, as an Iowa fan, because that's what I am. I'm an Iowa fan, born and raised. We got to start winning West titles. It's getting to the point where I'm not saying because it could always be worse. I understand that. It could be much worse. We could be Nebraska. We could be Purdue's not winning 9 to 10 games a year, Don. Northwestern, they go from 11-3 to 3-9 year after. It seems like this happens a lot with them. But at some point, don't you wear out your welcome if you can never actually compete with the top dog, which is Wisconsin? Because year after year, Iowa goes into that game, and I think everybody understood it this year, me being at the forefront of that was the biggest game of the season, and we continue to drop a deuce for that game. And, you know, I know we can talk about why that continues to happen, but the point is it continues to happen. That's why I believe, in my opinion, and everybody has the right to their own opinion, 9 to 10 wins this year without a West title, I don't know that I'd call that a success. We've done the bowl game thing, Don. We've been to the Outback Bowl. We've been to the Gator Bowl. I just understand the fans' point of view, and I didn't used to feel this way, Don. I didn't. I was one of those guys that said, "Look, appreciate what we have because it could always be worse." But at some point, you got to start competing for division titles, especially when you have a head coach of 23 years.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. One of the things I'm proudest of in our 20 years here with Coach Fry, we had 3 opportunities to win Big Ten titles, and we were 3 for 3. And all I'm saying is late in the season, when we had a chance to grab that brass ring, we were able to do it. We didn't falter, you know, when we got down to that last weekend. And I do recall that one of them we did need help. You know, if Ohio State hadn't upset Michigan with Art Schlichter playing quarterback that one year, we wouldn't have had a chance to clinch on that last Saturday. And the Ohio State game incidentally came first. They finished their game. We found out, I think, maybe shortly after halftime or so. And from that point forward, there was no doubt the other team didn't have a chance. I think it was Michigan State, as I recall, back in '81. And we had a chance to win the title, and we were 3 for 3 with those opportunities. We had 3 opportunities to do it, and we were 3 for 3. And the frustration we have, and a 10-win season is an outstanding season. There's no way to slice that other than that. And yet, as you say, you're defined by how many championships you win. And that's going to haunt us because, and frankly, would you rather take your chances in the West or the East? I'm pretty sure I'd rather be in the West.
Yeah.
So the opportunities are there, and we're always going to be contending for that title. But as you mentioned, Corey, at some point you got to get over the hump and find a way to win them. And that's been a struggle for us. And maybe that's a struggle that we're going to solve this weekend. I hope so.
I hope so too. And that brings me to a point that I failed to make earlier, Don. This is where I'm going to argue a little bit with you, debate you a bit, because you brought up how if Iowa beats Nebraska Friday, that puts more pressure on Wisconsin to win Saturday. But here's the flip side of that, Don. Iowa wins Friday, that eliminates Minnesota, which conceivably gives them less motivation to beat Wisconsin Saturday. You see the problem with playing Friday?
Yeah, we're in trouble either way, then, you're saying.
We're in trouble. We're done either way, Don.
Now, here's one question I do have. Let's imagine that, let's say, for Minnesota, does Minnesota have any chance to go to Indy? I'm not sure.
Yes, they do. They do. If Iowa...
I knew they could tie for the title at least, but they actually have a chance to go to Indy. But if 3 games
Iowa,
right?
And here's the thing. I know we both said this. You share a title. There are no shared titles. Let's just be honest here, Don. Either you go to Indy or you don't.
Well, if there are only 7 teams competing, then it's to share a title doesn't mean as much, does it?
Yeah, you got 7 teams, and one of those is named Nebraska. One of those is named Illinois. You either go to Indy or you don't, right? So the bottom line is Minnesota can still go. As I recall, the scenario. Let me pull up the scenario here because, of course, these aren't real complicated tiebreakers, but I want to make sure I get these right. Of course, Wisconsin, their path to Indy is they win, they're in. No matter what, they are in.
Right.
Let me pull
and then
up.
we have the second best chance.
Okay.
But of course, Minnesota has to beat Wisconsin. We have to beat Nebraska.
Wisconsin gets in with a win versus Minnesota or an Iowa loss plus a Purdue loss. Okay.
They have a Purdue loss too.
Yep.
Okay.
Iowa gets in with a win versus Nebraska and a Wisconsin loss. Minnesota gets in with a win versus Wisconsin, a win versus Iowa. I'm all thrown back around here. Win versus Wisconsin plus an Iowa loss Friday and a Purdue win, because then the tiebreaker goes to Minnesota given their win against Purdue. So there are all three of those teams still have a viable shot. But like I said, if Iowa wins on Friday, the path to Indy for Minnesota is gone. And so I just wonder, obviously you got to win Friday if you're Iowa. You don't throw the game, because if you do that, you don't make it.
Theoretically, that takes away the incentive of Minnesota.
But it is still a rivalry game, right? Minnesota,
Absolutely.
Wisconsin. So I would hope PJ Fleck, being the motivator that he is, could get those guys up for it, even if they know they're eliminated from the race.
Now, here's a question for you, Corey. How's that series gone in PJ's years? I believe that at the most they've won one X, I think.
One, I believe.
Yeah.
I'd have to look that up, but I believe one.
Yeah.
And that was 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Although it could be, I know it was. I think it was the snowy game. It was the year that
it was in Madison, though. Am I thinking right? It was in Madison.
Well, if
Maybe
it was in Madison, I'll look it up here.
Okay.
But yes, I just wonder. So to recap, for anybody who's not sticking with us on this, Iowa wins, Minnesota's eliminated, and they lose motivation to beat Wisconsin. If Iowa loses, we're out either way.
Right.
But you brought up the fact that perhaps Iowa winning Friday does put more pressure on Wisconsin, and maybe Minnesota would take joy in just eliminating their rivals, Wisconsin, from the West title.
Right.
Okay, here is the series between Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I don't know when PJ got there, okay? But let's just say this. Since 2004, Minnesota's only won once.
Wow. But it was in recent years.
It was in 2018. So I was wrong. The 19 game was a loss. The 2018 game was a Minnesota win in Madison, 37-15, and I don't remember that game.
That was a win for PJ. Right, in 18.
Yes, it was.
So he's beaten them once. Were the other games close in recent years?
Last year was 20-17, but I think we can throw that game out. I mean, both of those teams were racked with COVID.
Yeah.
19 was 38-17. Remember, that was a really good Minnesota team in 19, and Wisconsin blew through them. 18 was a Minnesota win, 17-31-0.
Wow. So in general, they have not competed.
That's why I say Nebraska was a better matchup. If somebody's going to beat Wisconsin, it would have been Nebraska Saturday.
Yeah, Nebraska is certainly the more explosive offense, and they proved that most weeks.
And I think the number that I read prior to that game Saturday, Don, was in 2018, Nebraska put up 490 offensive yards against Wisconsin, and then 2019 they put up 500.
Yeah.
So they have the mystery solved on that Wisconsin defense. I'd love to know what it is, but it was a missed opportunity for Iowa, if you will, but it was a missed opportunity for Nebraska as well. And I guess, who are we kidding? Shame on us for putting our faith in Scott Frost and Nebraska. Shame on us. And so
I actually feel badly for Nebraska, because that should have been a flag at the end of the game, and that would have made a really interesting finish if that would have been the case.
But there wasn't a whole lot of time left. There was probably
time. They only had one more snap, maybe two at the most. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. That's one 60-minute replay I'll watch because that would be worth watching, I think.
Andy brings up what's wrong with Hankins. Kirk's been very hush-hush on injuries, but sounds like Hankins will not be with us on Friday. Hopefully you get him back for a bowl game. That's what Kirk inferred yesterday, that he would not be here moving forward, at least for the time being. Sounds like Jack Kerner has a shot. So that's good news because they missed him yesterday. Quinn Schulte played well, but again, Kerner has been a leader for this defense. Go Hawkeyes 529 says that first drive was scripted. They threw way more than anyone expected. They had 75 yards there, 75 against the backups, not much in between. I give Brett Bielema credit. I'm sure that first drive was scripted by him, even though he was on his couch at home, Don.
Yeah, I don't know that, but it certainly might have been. It's not hard to imagine that most of those plays they identified as plays to be used in that opening drive. And I think it's a little incorrect to say 75 at the end of the game, 75 at the start of the game. That's all there was. Last time I checked, they outgained us by close to 100 yards, I think. But our yardage was more significant because we outrushed them. And talk about just general thought for how to play. Let's take away their running game and let's dare Peters to beat us, and he couldn't do it.
Yep, you're right. Yakov 22, could we ever see Kirk Ferentz agreeing to throw the ball 40 to 45 times a game? And we've seen that happen.
That was just last fall.
Yeah, last fall, Northwestern with Spencer Petras at quarterback, who wasn't playing well, throws the ball 50. Actually, I think they threw the ball 51 times in that game, and they were up 17-0, Don. So they throw the ball 50 times, but only when you have a 17-0 lead at home, Don.
Sounds like that would have been a great time to shorten the game, but hindsight's always 20/20.
It is 2020. I'm sure Brian agrees and Kirk agree that was a terrible, terrible game plan for those final few quarters against Northwestern last year. Andy Teeple, this is a valid point. I don't understand this either. He says, can we talk about why we wasted Cooper DeJean's red shirt yesterday just to use him on special teams mop-up? The kid is going to be elite. I don't know if he's going to be elite, Don. I don't know if you noticed this during the game, but he did come in late.
I didn't know who number 3 was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure this is still true. I think the rule is still that you can play 4 games as a freshman and still be redshirted.
This was 5, though.
Oh, this was game 5. I didn't realize that.
This was game 5. My understanding, this was game 5.
Well, I would imagine that they checked with Cooper to see what he would like to do, and he said, I want to play. That's just my guess that it happened that way, because obviously to play that 5th game is to sacrifice a year of your eligibility. And
Don, I am excited about him. I think he's one of the better athletes they're going to have on defense moving forward.
He made a nice play on one punt, and he was right there in front of the punt returner on another punt, I know. And, of course, I know he's an athlete, and we'll find a lot of good uses for him, I'm sure.
Go Hawkeyes 529 says DeJean was never hanging around for 5 years. So I guess there's something to be said there, but he doesn't have the luxury of the extra COVID years. So, he I guess if he's that good, then I guess he could declare early anyways, but you would just have to think. Now they are down guys on special teams. Maybe that has something to do with it, Don, with Ivory Kelly Martin being out, with Terry Roberts being out. But again, I thought the same thing. Andy brings up news on Roberts, Hankins, Jack Kerner. Again, it sounds like, according to Kirk, Roberts and Kerner have a shot this week, but it is a shortened week. Hankins doesn't look favorable, but we'll hear from Kirk on Tuesday. Go Hawkeyes 529 says, wait, 1991, Iowa's lone loss was a blowout to Michigan. Was that not a chance to win the Big Ten?
That was a midseason game. It wasn't late in the season. I was simply referring to the fact that late in the season, we had 3 opportunities to make it to Pasadena, and we made good on all 3. You're right. That was our one loss that year, but I think it was about game 6 or something. It wasn't at the end of the year.
Todd says, really looking forward to discussing staff changes that need to be made once the season ends. I agree. We should be competing, winning Big Ten titles, at least winning West titles. Let's not even talk about if we're going to go to the playoff, we had somebody call in earlier, I think it was Vincent. We should be going to the playoff once in a while. We got to win the West first before we're going to talk about going to the playoff or even winning the Big Ten. We got to actually get to the Big Ten title game. We've done it once.
Talking about making it to Indianapolis, because one out of 10 years is not good enough. We should be able to do better.
that's why I say yes, 9 to 10 wins is really good, but I don't think it's asking that much that we could make it to Indy here and there, and they haven't been able to do that on a consistent basis. Kirk Ferentz said Hankins should have had a golf cart to come out of the tunnel. I don't recall hearing that. Maybe he did, and I missed it. Might be a hamstring issue. Again, this is all, I guess, hearsay. These are maybe rumors. Might be back for the bowl game. Again, this is not coming from Kirk that I remember, at least in the press conference yesterday. Maybe I missed something. But yes, Kerner and Roberts have a shot at playing on Friday. John says, why no breaking of tendencies, especially on jet sweeps, have Padilla pull and roll out, throw on the run. They did that a little bit against Northwestern, Don. It seems like we've gotten away from sending Alex Padilla outside the pocket to throw, which is where he excels.
One of the nakeds yesterday, you might remember, they had a guy coming from space that really had Padilla dead to rights, and Padilla simply managed to avoid being tackled and got on the edge. The only thing that confused me, I think it's the same naked I'm thinking of. Laporta was coming from the backside, and he was absolutely open. And for whatever reason, Padilla didn't see him. Padilla ran, here it is, 2nd and 8 on the +45. Great job of avoiding sack on naked. Run option for +6, but too early on the slide. He gained 6. We needed 8. So now we got 3rd and 2. We only gained a yard. Thankfully, we converted on 4th down. The other one's the one I'm thinking of. There was another naked. Laporta was open. Yeah. Poor decision by Padilla on naked. Laporta open on the over route. Number 8 was a run option for +5. Incidentally, he ran out of bounds. And it's not a huge deal, but you try to get every yard, every foot you can, so that when you see Aaron Rodgers go out of bounds, you see the same thing every time. There's nobody nearby. You see him extend the ball out in front, right? Pick up the extra 1.5 feet or whatever you might pick up. But it just reminds that wing official that's spotting your forward progress, oh, by the way, be sure and reward me for this extended ball here. There's obviously not a tackler nearby. But I just noticed Padilla ran off the field without extending the football. It's a small thing, but it still might be a difference of maybe 2 feet on the spot. And it might matter on the next down or the one after. And so it's just something for Padilla to think about doing, is to get that ball extended if there's no one nearby. And obviously, if there's no one nearby, you should argue that you should have been adjusting down the field a little bit more to gain even more yardage. But one way or the other, get all you can. If there's a guy nearby, then don't extend the football. But if there's not, then by all means, please extend the football so that you can get that extra couple of feet.
And our final question comes from Erica Goldberg. Why do people hate PJ so much?
Short answer, he's too much of a self-promoter. Somehow he thinks it's all about him. That's the perception I think that a lot of people have. And I've always said, and I know Kirk Ferentz says the same thing, it has to be all about the players. The head coach is going to get a lot of notoriety anyway, but for God's sakes, be sure it's all about the players, because they're the ones that are sacrificing to such a high level to be out there playing this game we all love.
And Richard, appreciate the kind comments here. He says, Coach, really appreciate you. And I can share that same sentiment with Richard. As always, we've stole you for too long this evening. I'm sure Lisa's wondering what's going on, but she knows football sometimes takes time to talk about.
It means she has the full run of the TV, and that's something she looks forward to sometimes. Thank
Absolutely.
you, Richard. That's very, very nice thing for you to say. I appreciate that.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to our Iowa channel. If you haven't subscribed to our From the Hawkeye of the Storm channel, I encourage you to please do that, okay? Because not only do we produce Iowa content throughout the week from the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube, but we also have Iowa Basketball Postgame with Coach Gary Close, who is also tremendous basketball mind. We'll have him on tomorrow. All right, so subscribe to From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube if you haven't already done that. Please, it helps us out. And again, the more support, the more content we can continue to push out. And of course, it's all free. Tomorrow night, Iowa versus Western Michigan over at the From the Hawkeye of the Storm channel. We'll have Iowa post game. So the game begins at 7:33 Iowa time. It will be televised on BTN, and then we'll be at the From the Hawkeye of the Storm channel here on YouTube talking about it with Coach Close. And as we talked about, Iowa, Nebraska Friday, 12:31 kickoff time on FS1. And Donnie, you'll be with us Friday after the game. Am I?
Yes, and I assume we're going to be on the air shortly after the game ends.
We'll plan on it. You're not making your way over to Lincoln?
Nope. I'll be right here. I'll be right here watching it at home, and I'll be ready to go on the air shortly after the game ends.
Have you been to Lincoln?
Yes, I took a Western Illinois team over there. They beat us, but we did have a young man named James Norris that returned a kickoff 100 yards against him. And he's a PhD right now, matter of fact. So he's a very educated former wide receiver kick returner. And what else comes to mind about Lincoln? Wonderful fans, better fans than the license have on the road, courteous and congratulatory, especially if Nebraska has the win. They're very cordial then. Maybe not quite so cordial when Iowa goes over there and takes a game from them.
Absolutely. And also a reminder to everybody that we do Iowa Live with Mark Rogers every Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. right here, Iowa football at the Voice of College Football. Also want to let everybody know, this is important. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., okay, it's Nebraska Live, but I will be guesting on this show. So I'm sure I'm assuming it's our friend Greg Patterson from the Nebraska sports information or sports media. So him and I will be throwing punches tomorrow at 3 p.m. with Mark being the mediator. Looking forward to that. Again, right here, we'll have it on I believe it'll be on the Iowa channel. It will definitely be on the Nebraska channel as well as the main Voice of College Football channel. So 3 o'clock Central Time tomorrow. That's Monday. It's Nebraska Live. And, of course, as always, help us out. Donate to the Voice of College Football. Make a note that it's for the Iowa channel. Look in the description below for information on how to do that. And, Don, I think that's all I have for you. We appreciate the time, as always. I feel bad skipping this. So, Todd does throw this question in late here, Don. I promise this is the final question. Always heard Hayden loved getting the bubble, especially for bowl prep. Is this true? Please talk about it.
Yes. And I tell you how I remember so well. Back in 1981, when we qualified for the Rose Bowl, we had some brutal weather in the middle of December. And here we are practicing out in Kinnick. And it was a wind chill of, I don't know, maybe 0 or lower, pretty low. And they set up a little temporary hut with some heaters in it. And the theory was that the players in between reps, they would go in there and warm up again and come back out. But it had minimal success, I think. And at best, it was a really difficult preparation back then. To counter that, we would go to the bowl site early. And the only problem with that is you can definitely be too long at a bowl site. And I think we lost our edge a little bit because we went out early because we simply didn't have a good option on this end. And thankfully, the bubble came later. And the preparation was so much easier in the bubble. There's no doubt we got a lot of good work out of that bubble. And now we have an even better indoor facility now than what we had back then, of course. So it does come in handy. I do remember this vividly. One time we're playing Minnesota and Lou Holtz is coaching there. And it's a big game. If we beat them, as I recall, we're heading for Pasadena again. And there was a picture of Lou Holtz from that Thursday practice. And we debated that day, do we go out? Do we stay in? And the weather forecast was pretty good for the weekend. So Coach Fry said, we've already played in bad weather. We practiced in bad weather. Let's be comfortable today. Let's have a good practice in the bubble. And then after the practice, they interviewed Lou Holtz. He had, of course, a huge coat on because he was outside practicing. I remember thinking, did we make a mistake today to practice indoors, knowing that the game's not going to be ideal conditions outdoors? And the rest of that story is, I think it was a 3-touchdown win for Iowa. It wasn't close. So it just reminded me, you don't have to practice in horrible weather to be able to play in it. If you've experienced it a little bit, you don't have to beat yourself up and practice in it just for the sake of trying to be miserable. It's not necessary. If there's a lot riding on the game and you've already been able to function in cold weather, then you don't have to practice in it all the time.
Absolutely. And George, we got 100 people listening right now. You're looking at the number just on the Voice of College Football channel. Remember, most of our listeners are on the Iowa channel, which is what we want. 73 people on the Iowa football channel, and we're over 2 hours in. So, and Span, who's next in line for the Rose Bowl if Ohio State wins the Big Ten, goes to the Final Four. The Rose Bowl has some flexibility because of the new system with the playoffs. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be the runner-up, Iowa or Wisconsin. It could be someone else. As far as how it could be Michigan. Michigan may lose and not make the title game, Don. They could choose to go Big Ten, or I think they could go somewhere else as well.
It'd be kind of hard to imagine that they wouldn't pick Michigan based on a close loss this weekend to Ohio State. And maybe Ohio State takes the Western Division team in a comfortable spread. It'd be logical that it would be Michigan at that point.
Some comments just don't make any sense, Don.
I could only wish I looked like Corey when I was his age.
Gosh. We've digressed. If Seven Spine the Third says that I look like I don't know. Do you have any young pictures of you, Don? I mean, you're young now and everything's relative, but I mean, at 25, do you have any 25-year-old pictures of yourself? I can probably look them up.
Yeah, that'd probably be your best bet because I don't think I've got too many.
I've of course seen you in the classic Hayden Fry pictures, which you would have been in your 40s when you coached with Hayden?
Yeah, and 83 is the picture everybody always shows. I would have been 33 then, actually. I was born in 50, so I wasn't quite 33 in that picture.
All right. Well, that's fairly.
Here.
That's only. I'm 8 years short of that, Don. But that's.
I'm looking at the picture on the wall, and that guy does look a little bit like Burt Reynolds. Not this one, but that one does.
We're back to Burt Reynolds. All right. Well, appreciate all the camaraderie this evening. Again, we'll be with you following Iowa, Nebraska, which again is Friday, Black Friday, 12:31 p.m. on FS1. We'll be with you for Iowa postgame at the Voice of College Football. And the next time we're with you here is tomorrow, 3 p.m. for Iowa Live with Mark Rogers himself and his Nebraska contributor. And then we'll be with you over at the From the Hawkeye of the Storm channel for Iowa postgame for men's basketball after the 7:33 tip. Don, it's a pleasure as always, and we'll talk to you later this week.
Look forward to it, Corey.
All right, for Don Patterson, Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm in Iowa at the Voice of College Football. We'll talk to everyone soon.